You don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look at better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the second part of What If Naruto Meets Americandad? Special note, this fanfic is written and a masterpiece of DRAGONfromheaven on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. Early morning. Naruto groaned as he was woken up by a phone ringing before he quickly opened his eyes and grabbed it before it woke Lisa up, who was thankfully still fast asleep. "What do you want?" he hissed out with a sigh. "Don't worry Uzumaki, you aren't in trouble. I just called to tell you that I just had to stop an illegal deportation of the family of the woman you are in bed with," his boss said as Naruto nearly dropped his phone in shock. How do you know who I am in bed with?" he asked as his boss chuckled. "Naruto, while you are a very freelance agent, one of the best I might add, but I still have to keep my eyes on you at all times. Now I do not disapprove of your relationship given your situation that we somewhat put you in, but do be careful with who you bed in the future," he said as Naruto groaned. "Whatever, next time send a text," he said as his boss chuckled and hung up. Naruto sighed as he put his cell phone back on his nightstand before he smiled down at his gorgeous girlfriend as she slept next to him. He carefully moved back next to her and held her close to him before she let out a soft chuckle. "Morning Foxy," she muttered out as she turned over to face him and embrace him softly. "Morning babe, I was hoping not to wake you and let you sleep some more." "I'm sorry," he said as she shook her head. "No, I was waking up anyways and I wanted to make sure last night wasn't a dream," she said as he chuckled and kissed her softly, making her smile and wrap her arms around him. "Trust me, it wasn't a dream my queen," he whispered out as she rested her head on his chest. "Thank God for that," she whispered out as he pet her soft back as she smiled up at him before looking at the time with a frown. "Why do we have to have school today?" she groaned out as he kissed her forehead with a smile. "Not like we will apart very long. Plus we can always have some more fun," he whispered in her ear as she bit her lip with a smile. "I think I can go for a few rounds," she said with a flirty grin before she squealed from him, basically jumping on her. Hour or two later. Naruto smiled at Lisa, who was in a slight daze and wearing one of Naruto's shirts and a pair of his boxers since her clothes were currently in the washer as she sat at the table while he started cooking her breakfast so she won't be half exhausted through the whole school day. "Breakfast will be ready soon babe, so relax a little," he said from the stove as she weakly waved at him as he chuckled before a loud knock that resounded through the whole house. He frowned as he wasn't expecting anyone to arrive, especially this early. He looked down at his clothes to see he was only in his dark orange boxers. He shrugged. "Oh well, it is my house, so hope they are okay with it," he thought as he went towards the door, giving Lisa an embrace on top of her head before reaching the door. He sighed as he opened the door and raised an eyebrow as the whole Smith family was on his porch. "Oh, this is unexpected. What can I do for you Smiths?" he asked as he watched Francine and Hailey grow dark blushes as they stared at him. Francine quickly shook her head before she broke her gaze away from his abs and smiled at him. "I was just wanting to check on my last customer and see how he was enjoying the house, and seems you've moved in quite nicely I must admit," she said as her gaze drifted back towards his abs. Stan frowned as he peered into Naruto's house, nearly pushing the owner out of the way as Naruto clenched the door frame. "Stan, can you please stop that?" he growled out as Stan stepped back. "Well, I couldn't help but see someone who looks awfully a lot like Lisa Silver, but that can't be true since she was deported," Stan said, confused as to how his meddling didn't go through. "I don't know what you are talking about Stan, everyone in this house is a legal citizen, so if anyone tried to deport them they'd be abusing their power, wouldn't they?" he spoke out in a calm and suspicious tone that made Stan grow a bit pale. Naruto, I took the food off the stove so it didn't burn, Lisa spoke out tiredly from the kitchen. I'm having my food now since you really tired me out with the fun we had, she said as he chuckled and shook his head at her. He rose an eyebrow as he watched Steve growl and stomp off his porch, possibly heading back home, though he figured the boy was jealous, which he figured was fair. Well, as you can see, you interrupted us in the middle of our breakfast, so maybe we can talk later, Francine, since I feel you have a lot of questions, he said as he snapped his fingers, snapping the blonde housewife out of her daze as she and Hailey wiped the drool from their faces. Why, yes. I'll drop by Saturday maybe, she asked as Naruto nodded. Fine by me, Francine, see you later, Francine muttered out before she started to drag a confused Stan and a dazed Hailey away. As he closed the door and went back into the kitchen, he smiled as he saw Lisa eating her food from the table at a nice, slow pace as she was still tired along with savoring the delicious food. Who was at the door? She asked as he sat down next to her and started eating the food she had put on a plate for him. Well, it was the neighbors, the Smith family, he said as she looked up at him in a confused expression. He replied back. Steve's family. His mother sold me the house, so she just wanted to check up on it and see how I'm doing. Lisa shrugged, not really caring as she dug right back into her food to energize her so she could get through the rest of the day. Once she had finished eat, she quickly went off to the restroom to finish getting ready after grabbing her clothes from the dryer. Though she made sure that when she walked up the stairs she gave Naruto something to stare at as she swayed her hip, making Naruto contemplate if he would want to F her right then and there. Even if he has to dirty her up in the shower before cleaning each other off. After he took a quick look at the time, he smirked. F it, we still got time before needing to head out to classes, he thought before he quickly followed Lisa to the restroom, to which the two ended up not stepping out for another hour, though he was grateful for the sounds of running water that helped muffle the noises of their activities. School. Classes went by fine as the day went on, well, more boring than anything. Sometimes he wished that he didn't have to take his current assignment and just stay at home and do something else more productive. Though he was incredibly thankful that he was able to meet Lisa and that he was on his way to getting his situation under control at least somewhat. Naruto smiled as he and Lisa walked through the halls of the school. So you mentioned you needed more girls, right? Lisa asked in a whisper so there won't be too much attention. Unfortunately, yes. 3 is the lowest any of my family has had though, he said as she smiled and pulled a small notepad before she handed it to him. He rose an eyebrow as he flipped it open and started reading through the names. What is this for? He asked as she squeezed his hand. Just some girls that I thought could be into this, or at least be able to provide relief for you, or even be added to the open relationship, Lisa said with a smirk as Naruto nearly let his jaw drop at the long list, before he held her close and kissed her cheek repeatedly as she giggled. You are amazing, you know that, right? You are handling this 1,000 times better than I thought you would, he said as she smiled at him. Well, I can't just let my Foxy be in pain and displeasure or anything because of his situation, she whispered back with a smile. He gave her another quick embrace before he went back through the names to see if he actually knows them or not. He spotted a few names that he knew of, like the girl he met at the mall, Janet. He didn't realize though that she was the principal's daughter. He didn't think though that Janet was the type of girl that could be into this sort of thing, but he figured Lisa knew the girls at the school better than he did. As he continued through some of the names, he had to ask Lisa on who some of the specific ones that he knew were from, a few being in her cheerleading squad and some girls she was friends with. From Lindsay Coolidge to Becky Arangino, who he had learned that she recently moved into town before he did, to even that one girl named Jenny Bowen that he had seen around but never met. Are you sure some of these girls would really be okay with this? He asked as she nodded vigorously. When we first started dating, I decided to quietly ask around to see who was still attracted to you, even when they knew you were dating me, so I took it as someone being okay with sharing. Even a few girls that I talked to were curious. I wrote these down on the ride here and in a couple of my classes, and trust me Foxy, there's a lot on that list, she said as he chuckled and kissed her again. Well, we don't have to do anything just yet, but it is good to know I might not have to worry about this anymore. I should probably call you a lifesaver with all of this help, he said as she stroked his cheek. Lisa smiled as she trailed her finger down his cheek with a cute pout. "Ah, and here I was a bit excited to have some fun with a friend or two," she whispered in a sultry tone before she started to walk away towards their lunch table as she swayed her hips as she knew how he liked to stare. Naruto let out a subtle growl as he walked after her before he gave her a quick spank that made her jump and squeak before he quickly sat down at the table before anyone noticed, while he chuckled afterwards after seeing the bright red blush on her cheeks. It didn't take long that after sitting down before a few girls that were on Lisa's list had shown up to the table like they usually did. He smiled as a new girl slid onto a seat next to Becky. "Hi, mind if I sit with you all?" she asked as Lisa smiled. "Not at all, Jenny." "Naruto, this is Jenny Bowen, you've seen her around haven't you?" Lisa said as Naruto nodded as he looked Jenny over. Jenny had short orange hair that went down to her chin and had a slight curl at the bottom with soft green eyes. She had a very nice figure with a generous DD cup bust and nice slim waist before it went to her nice-sized rear. She wore a purple tank top that did well to exhibit her bust and show nice amount of cleavage with a tight pink pencil skirt that he noticed was shorter than normal to show off her legs. "I've seen that sweet ride of yours. I remember seeing it at the carnival's parking lot. Did you two enjoy yourselves?" she asked as Lisa smiled. "So much, Jenny. He was so sweet and romantic, basically confessing to me on the Ferris wheel," she said as Jenny smiled and let out a giggle, while the other girls smiled at Naruto for being so compassionate. "I know, I saw you two after you got off and I thought you two looked so cute together. If only I could find a sweet and caring boyfriend instead of those creeps that always go after me," Jenny said with a sad sigh as Lisa smiled as Naruto with a knowing look in her eyes. He chuckled as he mouthed, "In time," to her as Lisa smiled victoriously. "So ladies, what can I do for you today? Is it just a social chat or is there something else in mind?" he asked with a smirk as they giggled at him. "You know we just love spending time with you, Naruto," Becky said as she smiled at him. "That's why we are here every day after all," Lindsay said as he smiled clearly amused. They continued to talk until Janet came on by and sat down with them with a smile. "Sorry, can I come sit down?" she asked as the table nodded. "Nice to see you again, Janet. I forgot to call you but my furniture came yesterday and it works perfectly in my house and I'm glad you talked me into the larger bed since it is so much more comfy than the one I had before," he said as Janet smirked at him, while Lisa blushed understanding the hidden message behind that. "Ah, and I wanted to help break it in maybe since I could think of a few ways," she flirted with a smirk as the girls of the table started to laugh with slight blushes as they figured out what she meant. "Oh, trust me, he broke it in," Lisa said as she rubbed her thigh against his leg from under table with a smirk as the girls at the table squealed a bit, understanding what Lisa was implying. He chuckled as he noticed all the girls sending Lisa, "Tell me about it," looks as Lisa nodded, making them blush as they smiled at him. He didn't mind her talking about what they did in the bedroom, or the shower since he figured Lisa was using it to possibly let them understand what was really happening and what they were missing out on. He trusted Lisa's judgment since she knew the girls better than he did. Naruto frowned as the bell rang and everyone started to get up. He saw Lisa waiting for him by the door as he held up a hand telling her he'd be there in a minute. "Hey Janet, wait for a second," he called out as she stopped and turned around. "What is it, Naruto?" she asked with a smile as she crossed her arms under her chest to push them up a bit. "Well, I was wondering if you wanted to come over to my house after school for a little, sorry for not calling, dinner to make up for it," he asked as she looked at him shocked with a little blush on her cheeks. "And Lisa is okay with this?" she asked as he nodded. "Lisa was the one that suggested it and I thought it was a great idea," he said as Janet smiled and nodded. "Great. Wait by my car after school and I can give you a ride to my house," he said as she smiled before nodding and heading off to her class as he stared at her before he felt Lisa wrap around her arm. "Well, while I'm upset I won't be able to come over due to my parents, I want full news of what happens after the dinner," Lisa said as he smiled and kissed her forehead. "Don't worry, I will give you a full report, my queen," he said as she giggled lightly and continued along as they headed off to their classes. Chemistry. Naruto sighed as he sat in chemistry, as it was one of the very few classes of his that Lisa wasn't in or anybody else he knew from lunch or otherwise. "Now quiet down class please," the old science teacher Mr. Pinkerton said as the class stopped talking before he nodded. "Now it is time to partner up for our year-long lab partners. I do this so you can build trust considering you all will be handling harmful chemicals that can affect your health possibility," he said as the class started to get noisy again. "Quiet please," he yelled a bit only to get drowned out by the class. "Oi," he said, "be quiet." Naruto growled out annoyed as the class quickly grew silent. "Thank you Mr. Uzumaki. Now as I was saying before I was interrupted, these partners will be chosen by me," he said as the class groaned. "Now as I call out the group names move to an empty table in the back," Mr. Pinkerton said as he started listing out names. Naruto didn't pay much attention until he heard his name called out. "Naruto and Amy, you are group 9, he said as Naruto looked around to see who this Amy was as he saw her waving at him with a friendly smile. He smiled as he looked her over. She had long light red hair that went down to just above her slightly plump rear. She had light green eyes and rather full pink lips as she moved the sucker she was eating on back and forth in her mouth. She wore a white tank top that had a deep V cut to it that showed off a lot of her cleavage from her high C-cup melons and exposed a bit of her stomach, as she also wore tight blue jeans that squeezed her rear quite nicely. "Hi, I'm Amy, nice to meet you," she said as she pulled the sucker from her mouth with a smile. "Nice to meet you too Amy," he said as he smiled at her gently as she blushed a bit from him staring, considering she was extremely shy sometimes due to how she was often teased about her hair and figure back when she was in middle school. "Steve and Dennis, you two are group 10, Mr. Pinkerton said as Steve let out a loud groan as Naruto chuckled and turned back to Amy. "So Amy, how have I not seen you before?" he asked as she giggled. "I've been sick until now, but now I'm really glad I came back today," she said as she stuck the sucker back in her mouth and blushed as she looked him over. Naruto could not help but get the strongest feeling he would enjoy chemistry class a lot in the future as he smiled at Amy, not really paying attention to the teacher as he and Amy talked quietly so they wouldn't get caught, enjoying the entire class together. After school, Naruto smiled as he kissed Lisa one last time before she had to go to her friend's car to drive her home. He almost didn't want to break the embrace, and before he could deepen it Lisa broke the embrace, making him semi-strong. "I won't be gone for long Naruto, only a day before I can make up a lie to my parents so I can spend more time at your house. Besides, it's now the weekend so I could maybe stop on by," she said as he nodded before she got into the car as he waved to her. He chuckled as he walked to his car to see Janet resting on the hood of his car with her knees close to her chest, giving him a clear view up her skirt to see her lacy green panties. "Never thought I could be jealous of a car hood before for having a fine peach like yours pressed up against it," Naruto said as he started laughing as Janet blushed and quickly got off the hood. "Well, just wait and maybe you'll get the same," she teased as he chuckled at her and opened the door for her as she sat down before he got in his seat and started the car, making it roar and making some students back up, so not to be pushed back slightly from the force. "So what do you have planned for this dinner of ours?" Janet asked as Naruto smiled as he pulled out of the parking lot of the school. "A home-cooked meal and a tour of my house and meeting my best friend Kurama," Naruto replied with a smile. "Oh, the sweet little fox I heard about. I'm glad I finally get to meet the little guy since I was sick on that day," she said with a smile. "Just be careful, he can be a little pervert at times," he said as she giggled. "What, like his MSTR?" she joked as he gave a playful pout that made her giggle more. "Oh, relax, I happen to like it," she said as she placed her hand on his lower thigh with a smile as he smirked at her and increased the speed so he could get home even sooner as she moved her hand up very slowly. As they reached his house Janet gave him a playful smirk before she took her hand away just as it was about to reach the top of his thigh. "You have a very nice house here Naruto," Janet said as she got out of the car, looking at the house in awe. "Thanks, I'm not one for a massive house since I'm modest, besides my car. Luckily I have a lot of rooms in this house so I can have a lot of guests over," he said as she smiled and walked in after he opened the door. Oh, I wonder what the reason behind that for. Janet said suggestively with a tinge of pink on her cheeks. Stay for a while and you'll be more than welcome to find out, my dear. Naruto said with a feral grin, while he leaned in. Janet smiled as she leaned in and crashed her lips into his and held onto him as he basically picked her up to close the door behind them while they continued to make out. Wait, won't Lisa be upset? Janet asked as Naruto shook his head before he set her down. Right, I should probably explain everything, he said as he smiled at her. Come, we talk over dinner, he said as Janet straightened out her skirt that had been pushed up a bit when he picked her up. Janet nodded as she followed Naruto and smiled once she saw various pieces of furniture that she had picked out actually in his house. She grew impressed once she saw the delicious-looking food on the table. Wow, did you cook all this? She asked as he nodded. Yeah, of course I had a bit of help, he said as he gave Kurama a thumbs up from behind his back before Kurama huffed with a smirk and walked out to the living room without alerting anyone and being the best wingman ever. Janet smiled as she sat down. So how is Lisa okay with her boyfriend asking someone else out on a date? She asked as Naruto sighed as he rubbed the back of his neck a bit nervously. Well, it's a long story, but I will explain it just as I did with Lisa and you can decide what to do after I say everything, he said as she nodded. He started out the explanation the same as he did with Lisa, and as he came to the end Janet looked at him with a clear look of suspicion as she shook her head. That's strong to all take in. So you're saying you have to have a CC and be with numerous women or you could go crazy, she asked as Kurama hopped onto the table. It's true, dear, but he gains more from it than he loses in the form of danger, Kurama said as she quickly pushed away from the table. He talked, she said in shock as Kurama nodded. Yes, and I saw your underwear from under the table. There's a lot I can do, my dear. Hell, back in my true form I could shoot stuff from my mouth that made nukes today look like little kits, but he speaks the truth, Kurama said as Janet blushed a bit and adjusted her skirt. So that's why Lisa is so okay with you flirting and being flirted with, Janet said as Naruto nodded. While being one of your girls does sound very promising considering the endowed part, she paused as she took a glance at his lower body, but right now I'm not one to settle down, though doesn't mean I can't have fun with you, right? She asked as she grabbed the hem of her shirt and pulled it down to expose more of her cleavage. That can definitely work for me, he whispered out before he picked her up again, making sure to give her huge rear a strong squeeze. Oh my, so direct aren't you? She teased as she felt herself grow wet from the look in his eyes. Always when it comes to this, he said as he gave her another squeeze and quickly went up the stairs. Lucky but Kit, I swear I need a vixen or something, Kurama grumbled before he laid on the couch and turned on the TV. He hummed in thought as he remembered how he saw that one vixen when he went to the mall that one time. Maybe he should beg Naruto to buy him the female fox. Naruto kissed Janet deeply as he laid her on the bed and pulled down her skirt to expose her long legs and the thong that covered her PP before he pulled that down as well. Like what you see there? Janet asked as she spread her legs apart to give him a full view of her PP as she smirked once she saw something in his pants grow strong. Oh definitely, he said as he licked her PP making her He decided to continue eating her for a bit before putting his attention to her butt. He started to embrace and SCK on it, getting her more aroused with her moaning showing his success. Even decided to give in a soft bite that made her toss her head back in pleasure. As he saw her in awe of the minor orgasm he caused her. Seeing some of her nectar drip down, he decided to have a proper taste. Who would have known that such rich chocolate would taste so much like vanilla, he commented, earning him a deep blush from the beauty. He quickly threw off his clothes and revealed his fully strong foot-long member to her. Holy CRP. You're huge, Janet said with a massive smile on her face as Naruto smirked as he saw her nearly dripping wet PP. Of course I have to be careful considering how it would hurt to have all of this rammed into them, he said as she shook her head. Screw that, give me all of it, she said as she wrapped her hands around it and feeling it being very warm to the touch. Janet started to slide it as she had the tip of it with a before she threw off her shirt to reveal her C-cup milk chocolate-colored melons with dark brown tips. Looks like you have 2 Hershey's Kisses on you, I wonder how they taste," he teased as he ate his tongue around her NPL and ate on it, causing her to loudly from him paying attention to one of her most sensitive areas. He continued to lick and SCK from each of the tips, and he came on to a shock of her actually lactating a bit. "You're not pregnant, are you?" he asked as she giggled and shook her head. "No, it's just something that has happened when I get really turned on," she said as he smirked and latched back onto her melons, making her more and more until she grabbed his head and pulled him back, though moaned once he gave her NPL a soft bite as well. "Naruto, I want your massive PP in me right now," she whispered out in his ear as he smiled at her. "Are you sure about that?" he asked as she nodded vigorously before laying back down. "This isn't my first rodeo, though it is the first time mounted by a stallion," she said with a wink before he smiled down at her before he kissed her deeply and plunged his member in her as far as it could, which ended up being about 10 of his 12 inches. "Oh my God. You're hitting the end of my PP," she moaned out before he started thrusting, which caused her to throw her head back and let out even louder moans as he was continuously kept hitting her G-spot. "Oh, I'm just getting started," Naruto whispered out in her ear before he grabbed her melons and thrusted even more as he felt her PP tighten up again as she let out another loud "mm." "2 times so far. You sure are sensitive," he teased as she smiled at him with a blush over her cheeks. "I can't help it if you just hit all the right spots, baby," she moaned out as he kissed her deeply, sliding his tongue in her mouth before he continued to move in and out of her, not giving her any rest, plunging the rest of his rock-strong member into her, putting all 12 inches into her tight pages. During all this, Naruto started feeling his hands getting wet and glanced down, seeing Janet's melons leaking profusely. Not wanting to waste such nice milk, he latched onto her melons, drinking more of her, getting Janet feeling more pleasure than ever before in her life. He groaned in pleasure as he felt her PP squeeze around him tighter than before as he squeezed her melons again, letting them leak a bit more. 3 times already. So selfish, he teased again before she blushed dark red and flipped them around so she was on top. "If you want to leak, baby, then let me take care of that," she said in a sultry tone before she started to move up and down on him, making sure to plunge all the way down so all 12 inches went into her. Naruto smirked at her as he latched onto her melons again and gave her large rear a strong slap and squeeze that made her as she continued to ride him. "Baby, you'll milk me dry for once if you keep at this," she moaned out with a smirk. "Though it will be fair since I plan to do the same," she said as he looked up at her in worry. "Wait. I don't want to get you pregnant," he said as she giggled. "Trust me, I have many contraceptives, so no need to worry, baby, fill me up," she moaned out as she rotated her hips and made him stir around inside her. Naruto smirked as he started to feel competitive now with what she is trying to do of making him leak first before she could leak another time. "Well, 2 can play this game," he thought as he grabbed her hips and started thrusting his hips up and down, matching her pace, which earned him deeper passage into her. They kept at it until he ended up hitting something and realizing that he has reached the very end of her PP and decided to really take the plunge as he thrusted himself HRD on one moment that got Janet to scream as he penetrated through her CRVX and had plunged into her womb. Janet couldn't believe it, her current partner and now probably her only partner had gone so deep inside and actually kissed the very back of her womb as it caused her mind to start going blank and causing her to see stars, with her feeling slight pain at first, but it eventually started to become very pleasurable. She couldn't take it anymore as her mouth hanging open with her tongue sticking out, making her have a stupid face now before Naruto flipped her back over so he was on top, keeping inside her. "I think I win this, but not until I can paint your insides," he whispered out to her as she nodded slowly before he kept thrusting, making her smile. She didn't care anymore if she wanted to share him or not, she wanted to feel this good more and more and wouldn't want to part with it. It was then that Naruto took her and pulled her to the end of the bed. He pulled out of her, causing her to whimper slightly but also feel some slight relief of having the constant ravaging of her PP to stop. But then her eyes widened in shock as he took her and flipped her on her stomach. He smirked as he grinded his still fully irked PP on her throbbing, dripping lips so she could feel the heat coming off of it. She felt him lean against her back as he put his mouth inches from her ear and felt his hot breath run across her ear, making her blush and breathe in lust. I am far from done, babe, I want to hear you beg. I want you to beg for me to plunge back deep inside you. I want you to ask for your tight PP to be F over and over till it can't hold another drop of my juices. I want you to call me MSTR, he growled out as she felt herself wet 10 before he slowly bit down on her earlobe, causing her to MMM with the mix of pleasure and pain shooting throughout her body. Her mind was still processing everything, but she had gotten the message. She had tried to speak, but it was strong for her to do so with how numb her head is feeling. Even with her mouth hanging open that she was drooling profusely. Naruto sees she wanted to respond as she nodded her head, but she couldn't speak the words out of her mouth as the only sounds coming out of her mouth has been moans of pleasure and silent screams. Of pleasure, and slight sounds of gibberish. Though he wants to hear this ebony goddess beg for him to be inside her and paint her insides white with his juices, beg for his PP every day. He wanted to see her break for every other man but him. He wanted to make her his, and he knew she loved it. He smiled as he gripped her plump peach that was glistening with sweat with both hands and give it a strong squeeze. He couldn't even grab her full plump peach fully, some spilling out of his hands. He smiled as he saw her lift her head back and MMM as he massaged her glorious peach and spread them apart to look at her tight peach twitching as sweat ran down it. A smirk grew on his face as he decided to claim every part of her for him since he made it so no other man could pleasure her. His smirk grew as he lined up his PP that was glistening in her juices with her tight peach and before she could respond slowly pushed his way into her untouched peach. Unknown to him she had never done anal before and taking something so large on her first try almost made her black out and completely lost herself to the lust. She just saw white as she felt him slide deep and deeper inside of her. She had never felt so full, so stretched, so satisfied, so owned in her whole life and she honestly loved it. She felt his PP crash against her, jiggling her peach with each full move by him. Her blinding bliss continued when he pulled her up, exposing her drooling face as she smiled. You still haven't answered me. Do you want me to paint your insides? Do you want me to own this glorious body of yours? By the way your plump peach is trying to milk my PP, I would say you do want it, but I want to hear it from your mouth. Naruto laid her back down on the bed before he reached down and grabbed her BRST and started to massage them and her tips, causing more and more of her milk to torrent out of them. While he played with her melons he picked up speed in his reshaping of her peach with each move. To make things more extreme he moved his other hand towards her drenching lips and started pumping some of his fingers in and out of her at a fast pace. Say it. Naruto demanded as he thrusted harder into her as he pinched her nipples, causing her to MMM again. In response to this, her melons were starting to sqr more and more of her milk. Say it. Naruto said as he angled his move to make sure each pump causes him to send the full force of the move towards her stomach. Not directly hitting it to cause discomfort but sending enough pressure to cause unimaginable amount of pleasure to shoot through the core of her womanhood. Say it, he growled out as he pumped even more force into her now ravished peach, causing her head to tilt back and a large gasp of air to flood her lungs to make up for the air she lost from being pierced to her breaking point. Yes. Yes please FME MSTR. I want you to leak deep inside me. Fill either hole, I don't care what you do to me as long I get more of this. Just F me, don't you dare stop F me. Janet screamed out as she felt her mind starting to go blank. It was the tipping point for Janet. She couldn't handle it anymore and all she was blinded by in her lust. She didn't care about anything at this point, only that she got to keep leaking like she has been doing non-stop since she let Naruto mount her and turn her into his plaything. He grinned a predator-like grin seeing his prey finally give up and accepted her fate. Then you are mine and I will show you who owns this body from this point onward, Naruto said as his thrust started to pick up speed and almost piston in and out of Janet's now reshaped peach that now could only fit his strong PP. He groaned as he plunged every inch of himself deep inside of her and released a wave of juices deep inside of her. Janet moaned as she felt like a wave of fire just shot deep inside of her. She could only shout at the top of her lungs as she felt each wave of juices flood her once vacant and untouched peach. She couldn't contain herself as she CLMX once again, this time larger than the other times from the intense heat and feeling of still strong PP continuously thrusting in her peach. She was a bit in shock that she came from having her peach ravaged, but she knew she would want more, seeing how godly it felt screwed. By the end of all of this, she came so strong that her melons had to empty their milk and drench so much of the sheets. Her PP climaxed strong with her natural juices sprayed on a wide range. All in all, she felt truly satisfied as a result. She let out a sad whimper as she felt him slowly pull out of her peach slowly until it finally made it all the way out. She felt her peach not being able to hold in the amount of juices that was inside and moaned sadly as it leaked out of her and down her legs. Naruto smiled as he wiped off his juices-covered PP on her peach cheeks as he looked down at the panting but still conscious Janet. "I hope you don't think we are done," Naruto said as he grabbed Janet's hips and flipped her over while also laying her down on the bed. She looked at Naruto in shock and disbelief as she saw that he is still irked as the has been from the start. "We still have a long way to go before we are done," Naruto says as he opens her legs and dives back into Janet. Between the constant waves of pleasure shooting through her body, Janet can only think on complete she was though before the pleasure fully made her blackout. If her mind was broken in lust, it definitely was gonna be now. Good thing he will have more than one woman. If this was just me, I might die before I get him to go down, Janet thought before she became lost in the sea of pleasure given to her by Naruto for hours on end, to the point it only stopped because her body and mind couldn't take any more and she passed out. After waking up from his sleep, Naruto turned to the side, seeing Janet in all her naked glory sleeping soundly with several moans escaping her lips. He already noticed that it was pretty dark outside and could tell that the two had slept throughout the majority of the night. Seconds later he started processing what happened and realized what he had done to her. Though despite of him feeling down for being that rough, he felt a bit proud of himself. He didn't know how to properly apologize for being so rough on her and losing control of his lust. Though his thoughts were soon interrupted when he felt slender arms wrapping around him and kisses in between his neck and shoulder. He slowly turned towards her to see a very content look upon her face. She couldn't help but smile the whole time, that she didn't even care if her face started to hurt, but as she saw her lover frown she grew confused about what was wrong. "Naruto, what's wrong? What's got you so down?" Janet asked as she kept kissing some of exposed skin as she loved the warmth he gave off. I am sorry on what I did earlier, I so wasn't myself at all back there. I'm usually more focused and not as rough and more caring. That was pretty much all new to me," he said as he ran his hand through his hair with a frown. "I'm sorry for what I did to you, on all that of taking advantage of you, and..." He was soon silenced as Janet kissed him passionately before pulling back. "You need to stop blaming yourself. I understand what you're trying to say, but I forgive you for all of that. I honestly can say I have never felt that way before, but I'm very satisfied. Besides, I wouldn't mind doing that again later when I'm more prepared. Now let's go back to sleep," Janet said before pulling him back down as he smiled and kissed her cheek. "Next weekend." Naruto chuckled as he thought over the events of the week. It turned out that Lisa had been overjoyed of his time with Janet and had made him promise to have some dominative SEC with her later, as long as he didn't go as far as he did with Janet. Janet though had been over at his house a lot, as it seemed her dad didn't really care where she was whenever he had his turn of custody. Whenever Lisa and Janet were there together, Lisa slept with him and Janet claimed a spare room, except for the times they all had fun, and know how much fun those nights were. Currently though his mind was drifting towards to another dark-haired beauty, the first one he had gone on a date with. "I wonder how she is. I'm a bit ashamed I've been too busy, but not like I can be blamed," he thought as he stared down at Lisa and Janet as they clung to him in his sleep. He rose an eyebrow as he saw his phone light up, as he had set it to only ring when his boss rang before he picked it up and answered it confused. "Hello?" he asked as a female voice giggled on the other end. I'm sorry if I didn't call earlier in the week, but I just found your number in my old files. It's me, Francine. I was calling about us maybe talking this weekend and maybe go out somewhere, she said as he chuckled as he remembered making that date with the gorgeous blonde mother. Oh Francine, he said with a smile as he very carefully got out of bed without waking up either of his lovers and grabbing a new set of clothes. Don't worry, it's all okay and talking sounds fine right now, he said as he looked at the time to see it was already noon but understood why they slept in considering what they had done until early in the morning. Great. I was thinking since it is still pretty warm out we could head to this nice ice cream parlor I know, she said with a smile as he grabbed a pad of paper and wrote down a note for the two girls. That sounds great, is it the one on Main Street? He asked as he stuck the note on the fridge. Yeah, I should be there in about an hour, I just have to borrow my husband's car, she said as he grabbed his keys. Sounds good, see you there, he said before he hung up and slipped the phone in his pocket. Another date? You are coming along very nicely, Kit, Kurama joked as he smirked at the blonde. More of a get-together to talk than a date since she is married after all, he said as Kurama rolled his eyes. Only means you have more of a challenge to claim her. I wish you luck, Kurama said as he gave a mock salute with one of his tails before jumping off the couch and to the kitchen. I'll keep an eye on your mates so don't worry, he said before Naruto chuckled and left the house, making sure not to slam the door. Ice cream parlor hour later. Naruto lazily leaned back in his chair as he ate a spoonful of vanilla ice cream before the bell jingled and he looked to the door to see Francine standing. He noticed that this time she wore a long pink dress that clung to her figure very nicely and exposed a nice bit of cleavage and a good length of her toned legs that were looking great in her red heels. He didn't notice it last time she was at his house as that time he was more focused on keeping Stan out of his house. Over here Francine, he called out as she turned to him and smiled as she walked over towards him. Naruto, so good to see you, she said as she gave him a quick hug that honestly surprised him as he returned the hug. How have you been? She asked as she sat down. Good. You gave me a very nice house, he said as she smiled proudly at him. Of course I did, you asked for a house with 2 stories, a basement, attic and more than 5 rooms as well as a lease that allows additions to the house, she said as she could clearly remember everything he asked for. And you delivered fully, he said as she giggled before ordering some ice cream. As they talked about how he liked living in Langley Falls the conversation turned to relationships. So why haven't you asked my daughter on another date? Francine asked as she crossed her arms, unintentionally making her E-cup melons bounce and look even bigger, as she gave him a playful glare. I know, I have been beating myself up about it and actually been wanting to call her right when you called, he said as Francine smiled a bit, before she suddenly frowned, making Naruto concerned. Well, while you were busy, Hailey went back to her deadbeat boyfriend Jeff Fisher, Francine said as Naruto frowned. Is she okay? Are they pretty serious? He asked as Francine rubbed the back of her neck nervously. Well, she kind of moved out after she had an argument with her father, Francine said with a frown as she explained how Hailey had moved in with an old ex of hers in his van and was financially cut off so had to take up a job that Francine would change the subject when he asked what it was. Is she happy living with him or having trouble? I can always offer her a place at my house if she really needs it, he asked as Francine smiled and hugged him again, unintentionally pressing his head close to her cleavage. If you could convince her to come home I would be so thankful, Naruto. Please just get my baby to come home, Francine said as she hugged him before letting him go. Here, she is working here but don't overreact and do not judge her for it. I think her boyfriend suggested it and somewhat forced her since he refused to get a job, she said as she handed him a small business card. Mentally Deficient Young Women STRPCLB, formerly Crazy Girls, the card read as he rose an eyebrow but didn't comment since it honestly didn't matter to him. Well Francine, I'll try and either talk sense into her or give her a roof to stay under until she returns, he said as Francine smiled and gave him another hug and even kissed the top of his head as she squealed in joy. I will make it up to you, I promise, Naruto. I won't forget this, she said as he chuckled and kept himself from staring at her chst as she hugged him. No problem Francine, I'll go tonight before she goes on so she doesn't have to demean herself any further, he said as Francine nodded and let him go before her phone rang. Yes Stan? Francine asked as she answered the phone. I'm just talking with a friend of mine. Yes, I'll pick up some tequila at the store, and ice cream, she said as she rolled her eyes. I'm sorry but I have some errands to run, she said as he nodded. Totally understandable, I think I have a few as well that I should probably do but we can always talk again as this was really fun, he said as she smiled and nodded. Sounds great, she said as she brought him in for one last hug though felt something weird inside as he hugged her back and she felt his muscles as she pressed herself against him. She felt herself blush in embarrassment once she realized she kept her arms around him after he had already let go before she quickly let go. Sorry, I better go, Francine said as she quickly left the parlor, confusing Naruto a bit before he shrugged his shoulders. Haven't been to STRPCLB in quite a while, he thought as he let out a small chuckle as he imagined Lisa and Janet giving him a lap dance. Maybe I should order STRPR pole, he thought as he slipped the card into his pocket and started looking up how much they cost on his phone. Later that night, he rose an eyebrow at the sign of the STRPCLB out front as it was exactly what it said on the card, even the part in the parenthesis. He had told Lisa and Janet how he promised Francine, a friend of his, to help her daughter. The two of them were okay with it until he mentioned STRPCLB where they said to try and find, in their words, a cutie, which made him a little strong to be honest. Of course even if he didn't they still planned to go all out tonight since being at STRPCLB was bound to excite him. He nodded to the bouncer as he handed the man a bill fold with over $500 in it since he was only 17 but he had the money to break age restrictions. The second he entered the STRPCLB the smell of sweat and various fruit hit his senses before he walked further in before he quickly caught someone as they fell into him. I'm so sorry, a soft voice spoke out as he helped her up and slightly widened his eyes at the gorgeous woman in front of him. She had long dark brown hair almost black that rippled down her shoulders and to the middle of her back with dark green eyes that popped due to the eyeshadow on her eyelids. The only makeup she had on was the eyeshadow and a thin layer of lipstick over her big pouty lips. Her figure was what he would definitely describe as curvy mature bombshell. He swore that her rear was larger than Janet's and it made the pink panties on her almost look like they were about to burst. She also had a perfect slim waist and a bust that he was sure was an F or G cup that was barely staying inside her pink lingerie, also looking like it was about to burst. She was a few inches shorter than him though she was wearing nearly 5-inch platform heels. It's okay, are you okay though? Your ankle doesn't look too good, he said as she hissed in pain as she tried to take a step only to almost fall again before he caught her. I think I sprained my ankle when that customer pushed me, she said with a frown as she saw the customer being kicked out. Here, I'll help you backstage so you can relax and sit down, he said as she smiled at him. Thank you, you're such a sweetheart, she said with a smile and a giggle. The name is Tanqueray, what's yours? She asked as with his help she was able to walk to the backstage door before she gave the bouncer a nod to let them through. Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki, it's a pleasure to meet you Tanqueray. Naruto said with a smile. What an exotic name, though with a name like Tanqueray I think we are both in the same category, she said with a giggle as Naruto chuckled before he noticed the worried look in her eyes. Is something wrong? He asked as she slightly shook her head before he raised her brow making her blush. Fine. I'm just worried about my job. I am already on thin ice with my boss due to punching a customer for GRPNG me when we have a no-touch policy and getting injured like this might make him just fire me, she said with a frown as Naruto frowned. And if I get fired from this I will be screwed since it is my only source of money to pay for the cheap apartment I live in, she said as she wiped her eyes, clearly sad. I know what you're thinking, probably just another sob story from STRPR trying to milk someone for money, she said before she felt Naruto's hands on her shoulder. Tanqueray, I can see how distressed about this you are and how valid it is. Your occupation doesn't mean SHT to me, he said making her laugh softly. I can tell when people are trying to mess with me, comes with my job and I know you aren't being fake, he said as she smiled before he pulled the business card from his pocket and grabbed a pen from one of the STRPR's makeup booths. Here, if you ever need any help or just a place to crash, just give me a call, he said as he handed her the card as she widened her eyes in shock. Honestly? You just met me though, she said in shock before she narrowed her eyes. Oh, I see what you are doing. Trying to just be nice before you force yourself on me. I am not some slut or a where you can use, she yelled as she crumpled up the card, but before she could throw it he caught her wrist gently. Tanqueray, I am not trying to get you in bed. I honestly am trying to be nice, he said in a gentle tone as he crouched down to her level as she was sitting down on a sofa. To me all I see is someone in need. I don't see STRPR and I definitely don't see you as a where or a slot, I see you as you not any of that, he said before he saw tears build up in the corners of her eyes before she hugged him tightly. Thank you, she said in between small sobs. She was honestly surprised at the young man's caring tone in his voice and gentle look in his eyes. For the very first time in her career as a STRPR someone didn't see her as some walking ware or item. You're welcome Tanqueray, now hold on to that number if you ever need me, he said as he gently opened her hand and flattened out the crumpled card. Now as much as I hate it I have to go and get a friend of mine to return home to her parents, he said as she nodded. Will you maybe come and visit again if it turns out my boss doesn't fire me? Tanqueray asked as he smiled and nodded. Of course, now be careful on that ankle. Do you have someone to help you after work? He asked as she nodded. Good, I'll see you later, he said as she smiled and gave him a quick peck on the cheek before waving slightly to him as he left the backstage area. Naruto, such a sweet man, she thought as she read and reread the number to memorize it before she grabbed her purse that was on the booth next to the sofa and immediately put the number in. Naruto frowned as he looked around the STRPCLB for Hailey before the curtain on stage opened up as he saw Hailey walking out in a white bikini that had tassels on it with a white cowboy hat with white boots and red belt around her waist. He was stunned for a moment at how sexy she looked in it before he shook the thoughts out of his head before he quickly brought himself up on the stage, shocking Hailey. And Naruto, what are you doing here? She asked as she covered herself to the best of her abilities as the manager started yelling at them. Oh, put a sock in it. Naruto roared as he tossed a roll of bills at the man as it hit him in the head, and accidentally knocked him out before Naruto turned back to Hailey. I came to take you home, or at least offer you a place to stay, he said as he gently grabbed her hand and led her off the stage as she followed him, still somewhat in a daze from the shock. Why you'd really let me stay at your house? I thought you didn't care about me anymore, she said with a frown and a sad look in her eyes as he frowned and let out a sigh. Of course I still care for you Hailey, I have just been beyond busy with my life and I have been beating myself up about not calling you for a second date, he said as she narrowed her eyes a bit. And what has you so busy? She asked as she crossed her arms, forgetting what she was wearing as she basically gave him a clear look of her melons in the tight LTHR bikini. Naruto pondered whether or not he should tell her about it all, but as he saw the hurt and betrayed look in her eyes he sighed, finally relenting. Okay, but can I at least tell you somewhere else besides here since it is pretty personal, he said before she looked into his eyes and nodded. Fine, give me 10 minutes to change my clothes, she said as she started to blush once she remembered that she was basically standing in front of him with her melons on display, which he was doing a good job of not looking at, making her happy that her body wasn't the only thing he was attracted to. Naruto chuckled as he saw Hailey rush off to the backstage before. He sighed and patiently waited until she returned before he walked her out to his car, put her bags in his trunk and opened the door for her before closing it and getting into his seat. So? Hailey asked expectantly, are you gonna tell me what had you so busy that you couldn't even text me? She asked as he sighed. Fine, but you have to let me explain everything before you freak out, he said as she nervously nodded as he took the back streets to his house so he would have enough time to explain it before getting to his house so she could react before he got there. As he explained it to her he noticed several looks on her face. Worried, anger, disgusted and then somewhat understanding before she blushed and nodded. I understand, but that is really weird. Do you have any girls in your relationship thing? she asked with a blush as he nodded with a nervous look on his face. Technically I have one girl and a girl who is half in half out that stays the night a lot, he said as she frowned. Would I be considered equal and not something only for SEC, she asked as he nodded. Of course. I am not some pervert who only sees a girl for his body. Plus all my girls that are with me will be considered on the same level, though there will have to be some that keep the others in line, he said as he rubbed his chin as he thought it over. Well, I'm not sure about this since it sounds pretty odd, but I will think it over since I really do need a place to stay besides Jeff's crappy van, she said with a frown as he nodded, understanding her decision. I will never pressure you into anything or make you feel uncomfortable. I have many spare rooms that are all furnished, so I have the space to let you stay, he said as she nodded while they pulled up to his house. Now the girls' names are Lisa and Janet and they are actually really nice, he said as Hailey nodded as he grabbed her bags from the trunk and carried them towards the door before he opened it. Hailey looked around nervously before he went up the stairs as Kurama yipped at the top step. Hey Kurama, I think we have a new roommate for the time being, also she knows about our situation, so you can relax, he said as Kurama groaned. Thank Kami, I hate acting like a brainless kid, Kurama said as he stretched his limbs as he stood up. You don't seem as shocked as Janet and Lisa were, he said confused as Hailey shrugged her shoulders. Yeah, well, we somewhat have a talking goldfish living with us due to Dad's work, so I'm pretty used to things like this, she said as Naruto shrugged it off as well. So this is your room, it's one of the closest to mine with it being across the hall from mine, he said as he opened the door and set her stuff down on the bed. Feel free to unpack or whatever, though please at least call your mom to tell her you are okay in the morning. She was very worried when she talked to me earlier, he said as she nodded as they stood awkwardly in doorway before Hailey smiled. Thanks for all of this, you honestly didn't have to do it but you did anyways, she said as she leaned in to embrace his cheek. As her lips left his cheek she couldn't help but stare at his lips as she remembered how they felt last time they had made out. It is no problem Hailey, you mean a lot to me, so of course I'd offer you help, he said, but before he could continue he was cut off by her lips crashing against his as she made them fall onto the ground with her on top of him. He was taken off guard before he quickly started making out with her as he rubbed her sides before squeezing her peach as she moaned into the embrace. He smirked mentally as she moaned more the more he groped her before he remembered her knk as he gave her a strong spank that made her break the embrace and let out a very loud with a dark blush. The blush turned much darker once they heard giggling above them to see who Hailey figured to be Lisa and Janet standing in the hallway looking at them with smirks on their face. Don't worry about us Foxy, please, do continue, Lisa said with a purr as Janet giggled and gave Hailey a thumbs up. Don't worry, I'm with you girl, I love it when he spanks me. He always hits the most perfect spot with just the right amount of force, Janet said before Hailey's face, neck and ears turned bright red before Hailey quickly got up and ran into her room and slammed it close before giving Naruto a quiet, good night. You just had to tease her, he asked with a sigh as he stared up at them, chuckling as they both wore skirts, giving him a clear view up them. It was even better because they weren't wearing panties. Well sorry Foxy, we honestly couldn't help it. It was really hot how she pounced you and how she moaned with that spank, Lisa said as she smirked as she saw him peek up their skirts and his pants shift. Oh, is someone liking the view? Janet asked as he smirked. They were about to continue their conversation until suddenly the doorbell rang a few times. Foxy, expecting someone? Lisa asked with a suggestive grin. Maybe, you two should probably head on in, I'll catch up soon enough, Naruto said, already having an idea on who it was, and if he was right he was going to enjoy it. Should we get ready for you Mstr, Janet whispered in a sultry tone as he got up from the ground and smiled and gave them both a nice squeeze on their asses, making them let out a light You know it, he said with a wink as they giggled and went into the room as he went down the stairs and towards the door. As he opened it his guess was affirmed as Tanqueray stood nervously on his porch before the nervousness went away as she realized it was his house. Oh Tanqueray, that was quick, though I was expecting a call. How did you find my house? He asked as she pointed to his car. I asked the bouncer what car you drove and after that it was too easy to find you, she said with a giggle as he chuckled, thankful that once again his car had brought a appealing woman to him. Is that offer still available? Just so you know I'm still working but my other manager, not the jackass one I told you earlier but the nicer one, told me to take a few days off to rest my ankle before coming back. I just didn't want to stay at my one apartment anymore with it not being safe, she said as he nodded and motioned for her to come inside as he helped pick up her bags. Of course Tanqueray, I made the offer like a few hours ago so of course it's still open, he said as she nodded as she walked inside, having to rely a bit on him. Yeah, I would rather you stay here instead of somewhere dangerous. Tanqueray started to sniffle happily for a bit once he helped her in as she was really grateful. Thank you Naruto. You don't know how much this means to me, she said in between sniffles. In the morning I'll need to head back to my apartment, but would you possibly mind helping me move my things? There are some stuff over there that I just can't part with, she asked hopefully. Of course Tanqueray, I'll be more than happy to help, he said as he helped her up the stairs and helped her into one of the spare rooms. Thanks Naruto, you are so sweet, too sweet I swear, she said as she hugged him and buried her face in his chest as he rubbed her back while she was crying. It's no problem really. Naruto said with a smile before she broke the hug with a determined look in her eyes. You know what? To make it up to you, I'm gonna give you a prize. Tanqueray said with sweet smile on her face. Well considering my job I use a stage name to keep myself safe from stalker fans but I feel I can really trust you Naruto, she said as she softly kissed his lips before she pulling away. Please call me Tiffany, she said as he smiled at her. What a appealing name, he said as she blushed and fanned him away as he chuckled at her sudden shyness. I need to go to sleep, she stuttered out as he chuckled and kissed her forehead. Night Tiffany, he said before she closed the door behind him with a blush as his door opened. Come on MSTR, we are waiting, Janet and Lisa said in unison as he smiled at the lingerie before he walked off to the room, hoping the new soundproofing he did on the room actually worked since they were about to get really loud. Next morning. Naruto chuckled as he sipped his coffee as everyone sat around the table. Lisa and Janet were sitting next to him, both wearing his oversized shirts as pajamas smiling happily as Hailey kept blushing every time she made eye contact with them all while Tiffany had a look in her eyes like she was trying to figure the situation out. So Hailey, make sure to call your mother today since she is very worried about you, he said as he took another sip from his mug. I know but she will probably want me to move back and I am tired of being in that controlling household, she muttered out as he nodded, understanding how controlling Stan could be, demanding for her to do things and not to this, when she was legally an adult now. Well it's not like you have to leave entirely, Lisa said suggestively as Hailey looked at her confused. You could just live there to him but actually crash here more often than not. From what I heard your mom is okay with you being here so why not just stay here for the most part, she asked as Hailey frowned as she thought it over. If you're okay with it then I guess I could do that, Hailey said agreeing as he nodded before pointing to the phone. Still, call Francine and explain the idea and if she agrees then I'm all for it, he said with a smile as she smiled and walked into the kitchen to call her mom. So Tanqueray, he said as he didn't know if he should use her real name in front of others, do you still want to head to your apartment to get your stuff? I have a truck we can use, I would just have to ask it to be dropped off from my garage, he said as she smiled at him and nodded. Yeah, I didn't want to go last night due to it being a pretty shady part of town. Also you can call me Tiffany at home Naruto. I wouldn't mind at all on that, she told him as he smiled and nodded before turning to his girl and his friend with benefits, that liked to stay over. So what are you two girls going to do today? It's still the weekend you know, he asked as they giggled and looked at each other. Well we were thinking of maybe going shopping around the mall, hang out with some other friends and check in with our parents so we should be back around the late afternoon, Lisa said as Janet nodded. Well I can lend you my card if you need it, he said as he pulled out his credit card from his wallet before Janet snatched it up before they kissed him on his cheeks. Thanks Foxy/Sweetie, they said before rushing up the stairs, their BRST jiggling while they ran as he tried not to stare in front of Tiffany, who had a confused look on her face. "I can explain what that was all about later, I promise," he said as she nodded slowly before he got up and pulled out his phone. "Give me 10 minutes to call my guy and get my truck while you get dressed and finish getting ready," he said as he continued not to look at her rather adult sleepwear. Tiffany blushed a bit as she remembered what she was wearing since she had forgotten that she wasn't at her own home this morning. "Why yeah thanks," she stammered out before rushing up the stairs, unintentionally flashing him the sight of her rear with only a thin thong covering it. He chuckled a bit at her as he pulled out his phone and dialed his garage's number. "Yeah, it's Naruto. I'm going to need whatever truck I have that can hold the most in the bed," he said as the man listed off various trucks that could do the job. "Third one you mentioned should be perfect. I need it here in the next hour and have someone pick it back up when I call back after I'm done," he said as the man agreed before he hung up just as Hailey walked back in from the kitchen with a smile. "Oh, did everybody leave or something?" she asked confused as he shook his head. "Just getting ready before they leave to do their own thing." "What did Francine say?" he asked as he started to stack up the plates from breakfast and dumped the leftovers into Kurama's bowl, who chuckled happily at him as he stared at all the food before digging in. "She said I can stay here for at least half of the weekdays and full weekends, but I have to go on mother-daughter days with her, which in all honesty isn't that bad," she said as she shrugged her shoulders since her mom was a million times better than her father, so occasional days with her was a very light price to pay to be able to spend time with Naruto. "That sounds fine to me. I'll have to give you a spare key that thankfully I made a lot when I first got the place," he said as he headed into the kitchen and opened a drawer and tossed her one of the many keys that were in it before grabbing another one for Tiffany. "I should probably head home since my mom wants to talk with me and I really need to break up with Jeff," she said as he nodded. "Do you need a ride or anything?" he asked as she shook her head. "Nah, I'll be fine. You only live 2 streets down from me, so I'll be fine," she said as she started to fidget nervously before she quickly gave him an embrace on the cheek before rushing upstairs to get changed. "You're a lucky brat, you know that?" Kurama grumbled as he took a break from his food to give him a glare. "Yeah, and boy do I love it," he said as Kurama grumbled more as Naruto chuckled and went into the living room to wait for Tiffany to come downstairs, while Kurama just went back to eating. He smiled as he gave Janet and Lisa a deep passionate embrace before they left with his Lamborghini's keys since he trusted Lisa to drive it since she occasionally drove it from time to time, and even a quick peck from Hailey until Tiffany came back downstairs. She was wearing a black tank top that showed off her melons nicely and tight skinny jeans that made her rear look perfect and firm. "You ready to go?" she asked nervously as she adjusted her tank as she started to feel self-conscious. It wasn't even that he was staring, which she really liked about him since after he had looked her over once before keeping his eyes on her face. She thought it had something to do with how he made her tingly inside since the first time she heard him say her name, which rolled off his tongue so right. "Yeah, I'm ready to go and my truck just got here," he said as he opened the door for her, which made her giggle and smile from his manners. "Wow, that's a nice truck," Tiffany said as she looked it over. It was pitch-black truck with an orange fox snarling on the hood that was slightly raised and could easily seat at least 6 and had the bed space to hold a small 2-seater car in it. It had massive off-road tires that were so thick she doubted anything could pierce them. "Do you need help getting in? I have steps installed just in case," he asked as he opened the door for her before she shook her head. "No, I'm fine, just inspecting your nice ride," she said with a smile before climbing up the steps and getting in. Her smile grew a bit more as she looked back to see he had averted his eyes and didn't stare at her peach as she got in before he closed her door for her and got into his side. "So Tiffany, where is your apartment building?" he asked as she smiled and started to give him directions. She really enjoyed the ride as during the entire drive to her apartment they had talked about so many things and she found out he was just as sweet as she thought he was. "So what is your relationship with those 2 girls that sat next to you at breakfast as well as that other girl?" she asked as he frowned slightly. "With Hailey, she is a neighbor of mine that basically has father issues with him being an idiot and a control freak and needed a place to crash to get away from him for a bit. Lisa and Janet are a long story. I'll tell you when we get to your place and start packing up since I'd rather tell it to you in one go, he said as she nodded after seeing the serious look in her eyes as they pulled up to her apartment building. Naruto frowned as he looked over the run-down look of the building as he saw the cardboard sign in a window that read Manager. Tiffany, why don't you head up to your apartment and start packing? I'm just going to talk with the manager to make sure you don't get in trouble, he said as she nodded. Okay, but be careful, he can be a bit of an butt. I'm in apartment number 9, I'll leave it unlocked for you, she said as he smiled and nodded to her before she went up the stairs and he knocked on the manager's door. What is it? I thought I told you all to F off, a male voice yelled out before the door opened to reveal a man that literally looked like those greaseball you would see in the movies with the thinning hair that was greased back with a tacky button-up shirt that was open to reveal a lot of CHST hair and golden chains. Hello, I am here about apartment 9 to talk over her sudden release from the lease contract, he said as he put his foot in the doorway to keep the door open as he gave the man an all too sickly sweet smile that made the man shiver and take a step back. Naruto smirked as he stepped inside of the apartment before closing the door behind him. Anyone nearby the apartment could hear the sound of some crashes, yelling, screaming, breaking and various other noises. The sounds quieted down for a bit before Naruto walked out of the door without a scratch with a handful of cash that he acquired from the manager to officially close up Tiffany's lease and even gave her the entire security and damage deposit as well as the money back for her last month of rent after he talked with him. He quietly walked towards apartment 9 before he saw some thug-looking men peeking through the window. Naruto glared as he cleared his throat and let out a decent amount of ki as they started to shiver. You have no business here, so either beat it or I will beat you to an inch of your life, he growled out before they all quickly ran off. Smart move, he thought as he opened up the door with a smile as he saw Tiffany packing up some things in one of the several boxes she had stacked around the apartment. From what he can gather that all she had left to pack up were her clothes and some other small items and then she would be all set. You work fast, he said with a chuckle as she giggled. I have been packed up for a long time since I've been wanting to leave this place since I got here but haven't been able to until now, she said as he nodded, understanding why since her manager had been charging her 3 times the rent compared to his other tenants. Well, I was able to talk to your manager and after some talking, I was able to close up your account and get you a full refund on your last month's rent as well as your security deposit, he said as she smiled happily and gave him a hug before a growl sounded out from behind Naruto. When Naruto turned around he saw an average-sized, snow-white wolf-looking dog that had some black swirls on its hind legs and a bit of black that colored the tip of its tail. Ami no girl. He's okay, he's not a danger, she called out quickly before the now-named Ami sat down and cocked her head to the side in confusion before she let out a sigh of relief. Sorry about that, Ami can be very protective, she's the only reason I've been safe here since she is the best guard wolf, Tiffany said as she crouched down and gave her pet a hug as the wolf gave her kisses on her cheek. Ami, that's an interesting name, he said as the wolf walked over to him and started sniffing him. It's short for Amaterasu, it was the name I came up with when she was a little pup, she said as he crouched down and pet the wolf and smiled. I hope that's okay that I bring her. I'm so sorry that I forgot to tell you about her, she said as he waved it off. No worries, Tiffany, it's fine. Besides, my pet fox needs some company while I'm not home anyways, he said as she nodded before she snapped her fingers as she remembered something. You still have to tell me what was up with those 2 girls, she said seriously as he chuckled and nodded. Yes, I still do, don't I, he said with a sigh as he moved over and started to put various things away into the boxes. Just please keep an open mind on this as well as keep in mind it was not my intention for being nice to you, I was nice to you because I saw that you needed the helping hand, he said as she nodded. Naruto was a little nervous as he explained everything to her as through the entire thing she had been completely silent as he made sure not to skip any details. It was actually a bit uncomfortable of how quiet she was, the tension was almost becoming too much even for him. He was going to say something but she interrupted him. So you're building some big family thing since your family has done it for a long time, she asked as he nodded nervously. Yeah, so far Lisa is a member, Janet is like a half member only being there for Well, since she doesn't want a relationship right now, and I think Hailey will be joining soon, but it's her choice obviously if she actually wants to be a part of this, he said as she stared at him, looking him straight in the eyes. Do you care for all of them, or are you really some pervert? She asked in the most serious tone he heard as he nodded, keeping eye contact with her. I care for every single one of them to the point where I can say I love them. Hell, I'll willingly put myself in danger to save them if it ever comes to it, he said as he said it with a serious tone that matched hers before her serious look changed into a smile before she nodded. I knew you were too sweet to be some pervert, she said as she went over and gave him another hug and a peck on the cheek. Though it does sound interesting, she said with a flirtatious smirk as he shockingly stared at her dark green eyes. Are you serious? 'Cause it's not like I told you just to get you to join or anything, he said as she giggled and stroked his cheek. Oh, I know, sweetie, but if it means I get to be with the sweetest man I have ever met, then of course I'll join, no matter the number. Though there is one thing that I would really like in return, she sweetly asked as she trailed her finger down his chest. And what would that be? He asked as she suddenly grabbed a hold of his crotch strong and gave him a look that made him even harder from the amount of lust and want in her eyes. I want a taste of what I'm getting into, she whispered out in a sultry tone before she led him over to her bed and pushed him onto it. Before he could even register, she had somehow gotten his pants and boxers down before his member slapped her in the face, shocking her by the size. Wow, you weren't joking when you said you were endowed, she said as she stroked his member and looked it over as she licked her lips. As she slowly moved her hand up and down his massive member as she ate the tip of it as she tasted his pre-juice before she started to stick some of his member in her mouth, only able to fit 7 inches in her moist mouth. Naruto let out a pleasure-filled groan as she started to bob her head back and forth as well as continue to slide him since she wasn't able to get his full length in her mouth since he didn't expect any girl to be able to considering how big it was. Tiffany, it feels so good, he groaned out as she started to really use her tongue while she plunged her head down more, swallowing up to 9 inches before she pulled back and let it pop out of her mouth. I'm just getting started, sweetie, she said as she slid her tank top off over her head and let her large melons fall over his stiff member. Also, just so you know, they are all natural G-cup, she said with a wink before she moved her tips around his member and started to move them up and down as she ate on the top 4 inches that stuck out of her cleavage. Oh God, they feel so soft, he groaned out as he pet her head, making her smile and start moving her tips and eating even faster. Come on, sweetie, be good and leak for me. I really want to taste your syrup, she whispered out as she continued to slide his pee-pee with her tips and eagerly ate on the tip. Naruto, with all his practice with Lisa and Janet, had gotten to a point where he resisted coming to prolong their SEC, but with Tiffany's massively soft melons and her skills with her mouth, he quickly found himself on the edge of leaking. Tiffany, I'm almost there, he groaned out as Tiffany smiled victoriously as she quickly shoved as much of his member as she could take into her mouth and used her melons to squeeze around it before she felt it throb before it burst. She almost choked as it burst out, a massive stream of juices down her throat that also started to fill her mouth before she worked to swallow as he continued to shoot out. After nearly a minute of leaking and swallowing, she pulled her head back and wiped her lip as some trailed down before she ate it off her finger. That, sweetie, is pretty much the appetizer of what you would get later on, she said teasingly before she got up from the bed to use the restroom to clean up. On her way over, she made sure put some extra sway to her hips, making Naruto tell she was really going to enjoy being in the relationship. Hour later. It actually didn't take as long as he expected to get her things into his truck before they had driven back to his house with Amy sitting by the window as Tiffany sat in the middle and leaned against him as he drove the entire way. Once he arrived back to his home, he immediately started moving all of Tiffany's stuff inside of her bedroom and left her to do the unpacking since Tiffany wanted to do it on her own, which he was totally fine with that since women she had said there were surprises in a few of the boxes that she would use later on. The only problem currently though was Amaterasu or Ami, as she has been rather stubborn when he tried to get her to calm down. She had been totally fine when Tiffany was around, but then again she practically raised her for who knows how long, so is only calm around her most likely. His thoughts were soon interrupted when said wolf came in, and what Naruto swore that she was giving him the stink eye for whatever reason that he was unsure of. Oi Naruto, finally you're bae, Kurama said before he froze as the nine-tailed fox's eyes froze on Ami as she looked towards the fox in confusion. It was as if time slowed down for him. The beauty of Ami put Kurama in a slight daze. You finally listened to me, brat. You got me a mate, he yelled as he darted towards the gorgeous white wolf before he groaned as he crashed into the wall. He looked back towards the wolf that was now standing on the table as she had jumped out of the way of his advance. Naruto, are you okay? I heard a loud crash, Tiffany said as she walked back downstairs before she squealed as she saw Kurama rubbing his snout with his paws. You must be Kurama. Oh, Naruto told me about you and I have got to say thank you for making him so big, she said as she hugged the shocked fox against her melons as he let out a giggle before Ami started to growl. Get away from my MSTR, you perverted fox, a soft female voice yelled out as Naruto looked towards Ami in shock. I knew there was something off about you. You felt way too aware and gave off this weird aura like Kurama does, he yelled as Ami cursed and got off the table. She grumbled. Wait, Tiffany, why didn't you tell me she was a spirit like Kurama or at least talk? He asked as Tiffany frowned and let down Kurama, who whined from being taken from the soft paradise, and looked at Naruto nervously. Ami wanted it to be a surprise since she wanted to judge you first before anything since she could feel Kurama's presence on you. Yes, and while I dislike that perverted fox's scent on you, I guess you are okay, but if you hurt my MSTR I will kill you, Ami said as her form flickered between her normal form and some other form where she had red markings and a huge circle on her back that was surrounded by fire. Naruto rubbed his temples in frustration and confusion as he sighed. I'm not angry or anything, but please tell me there is nothing more you forgot to tell me, he said as she shook her head signaling a negative. No, that is it, I swear, she said as she kissed his cheek softly and stroked his arm as he nodded. Well then it's fine, just a bit of a shock, he said as he watched as Kurama gave Ami hard eyes while Ami gave him a death glare. Well, you always said you liked girls who played strong to get, here's your chance buddy, he thought as he chuckled at his friend's predicament. As he and Tiffany cuddled on the couch he wondered how Lisa and Janet were doing since he hadn't heard from them yet. Lisa and Jane. The two girls smiled as they walked around the mall with their group of friends. They had been enjoying their little shopping spree since Naruto didn't care if they spent money since he had told them he had enough money to buy the mall as well as everything in it and still have 3 times what they spent left over. Though that didn't mean they were going to spend that much at all since they would feel terrible about it since the money was not a reason for why they were with him. As they walked through the mall a certain store caught Janet's eye before she caught Lisa's attention and pointed to it and chuckled as it made both blush. The store in question was a SEC shop where they sold various toys and outfits that were to be used in the bedroom. You want us to go in there? Wouldn't that be embarrassing? Lisa asked, getting a little shy since she had her limits of what she would tell her friends as attempts to try and make them keep going for Naruto. Lisa, we have done dirtier things in the bedroom. Hell, you once ate me out while he screwed you and you are nervous about a little lingerie and toys? Janet asked in a whisper as Lisa blushed a bit more. But we don't know what he likes, Lisa stuttered as Janet smirked as she wiggled the credit card in her hand. Why don't we get one of everything and just get it mailed discreetly to the house and know Naruto he will enjoy whatever he sees us in and you know that, or sees us take off. And with the toys we can either keep to ourselves for our pleasure, bring them into the bedroom or just get a refund. Everyone wins. Janet said before Lisa nodded and excused them both from the group of friends, promising to meet up at the food court before they snuck into the store and bought one of everything. He is going to love these, trust me hun, Janet said as Lisa nodded. Who knows, he might even reward us for getting these things, she muttered as she crossed her legs a bit. Hold it in until we get home, or do you want to grab a VBRTR to use, Lisa teased huskily as she blushed and jokingly hit her on the arm before they both laughed and continued through the mall, excited for when their packages came. Naruto felt a shiver down his spine as he felt he would be confined to bed in the next few days, but for the oddest feeling it felt like it was in a good way. Are you okay, sweetie? Tiffany asked as her head rested on his lap as they watched TV. Yeah, I'm fine, he said as she giggled. "Oh, then you just got harder for no reason?" she asked as he stroked her cheek with a smirk. "Well, considering a gorgeous girl is laying on my lap wearing a very revealing tank top, you can't really blame me," he teased as she blushed a bit with a smirk. "Oh, I would so mount you right now, but I really am forcing myself to wait for after work before our first time, since the stress relief after it all will make it even more amazing," she said as he smirked and rubbed her legs, making her bite her lip and try to suppress a mm. "I can't wait," he whispered out before she quickly moved onto his lap and crashed her plump lips against his, since even if she was waiting to have a CC didn't mean she couldn't relieve some of it by making out with him. They continued to make out as he started grpng her peach until his phone started to ring and play his boss's ringtone as he groaned in annoyance as he broke the embrace. "Who is it?" she asked as she kissed up and down his neck. "It's my boss, I really have to take this," he said with a groan as he rubbed her peach with one hand as he answered the phone. "You have the worst timing, I hope you know that," he said as he let out a groan. "Well, I am very sorry for whatever adult actions I have stopped you from doing, but I am calling a mission since you owe me for keeping your girlfriend safe," his boss said as Naruto grumbled. Sometimes he couldn't take his boss' sarcastic tone serious at times. "Fine, but it better not take too long since I have something important to do later tonight," he said with a smirk as he gave Tiffany's peach a strong squeeze that made her bury her face in the crook of his neck and let out a muffled mm. "I'm sure you'll be able to get it finished with time to spare since it is a simple surveillance mission with a quick bugging. Your ride should be there already and the mission info is inside," he said as Naruto frowned as his boss hung up. As he put his phone away, Naruto groaned as he had to get up from the couch and leave Tiffany due to his work. He didn't know if he could make it back before she got off from work, but given she got off pretty late at night he hoped he'd be fine. "You have to go?" she asked as he nodded and kissed her deeply. "Yes, but I will be back before you get off work, I promise," he said as she nodded. "You can use my car to go to work once Lisa and Janet get back since they shouldn't be out for much longer," he said as she nodded. "Okay, well, see you after work," she said as she waved to him before he left. "DM right when it was getting good," she said as she groaned into a pillow. 3 hours later. Naruto sighed as he blended into a bar as his target sat next to him. He was supposed to keep an eye on a suspected Colombian drag cartel member and plant a bug on him so they could track him in the future. He had followed the man to the bar he was currently sitting in and decided it would be the best time to plant the bug. "Another beer this way," he said as beer never affected him due to Kurama siphoning it off the second it hit his BLD stream. "You sure can hold your drink there," the man next to him said as he shrugged. "Natural talent of mine, I have never gotten drunk yet, and trust me, others have tried," he lied, considering he very rarely drank since he wasn't fond of regular beer and had a liking towards sake more. "Boy, I wish I had that skill. Nice to meet you, boy," he said as he held out his hand as Naruto quickly placed the untraceable bug that was covered by a thin layer of fake skin in his hand before shaking the man's hand, transferring the bug to him. "Nice to meet you too," he said before his target stood up and left, leaving him at the bar with his mission complete. "And that is why I am the best," he thought with a smirk as he was about to get up from his seat before the sound of a woman crying made him stop. He looked around until his eyes landed on the one who was crying as she lifted her head up from the bar. She had dark brown hair that was the same color as chocolate as it was in 2 braids that went down to her chest. Her skin was an appealing shade of caramel that shined in the brightly covered bar, making her look like some goddess of the hunt. Her eyes were such a appealing shade of brown, with her lips being quite big, pouty, and so tempting that it just made his want for her go up and embrace them. From what he could see of her figure under her turquoise-colored short-sleeved shirt and light blue long shirt, she was covering a gorgeous figure. As he could see from her seat, she had a rather large and plump rear, easily being bigger than Janet's with only a bit smaller than Tiffany's. Her bust, while also hidden, he could clearly see indications and outlines that they were at least a DD cup and rather perky. "I'm sorry to bother you, but are you all right?" he asked as she looked up from the bar and wiped the tears from her eyes and cheeks. "I'm just fine." "Perfect. Except for the fact that my husband is a JRK and I can't even feel safe in my own home because one wrong move and the tribe is kicked off my husband's land, she cried out as he frowned and sat beside her, softly rubbing her back as she cried. Talk to me, maybe I can help, he said as she sniffled and looked at him confusedly. Why would you help me? I'm a complete stranger, she said as he chuckled and smiled at her warmly. Because when I see someone in trouble I at least offer and see what I can do. I believe that it comes back to you in other ways, he said as she blushed a bit from his kind smile. What is your name by the way? He asked as he silently paid for her bill and helped her from her seat. Suliouha, I hate my last name so I refuse to use it, she said as he nodded and helped her towards the exit. That is a appealing name, he said making her blush again as he pulled out her phone and dialed a number. Yes, hello, I need a taxi to take us to Dash, he paused as he looked to Suliouha for an address. The Sandy Shore Motel, I don't want to go home right now, she muttered out as he shrugged his shoulders. To the Sandy Shore Motel, he said as he told them the address of it since the motel happened to be his pickup destination as well as the bar's address. He'll have to reschedule the pickup time later after he makes sure she at least went to sleep in her motel room safely. I'm sorry for all of this, Suliouha said as he waved it off nonchalantly. No worries, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night if I didn't get you somewhere safe to sleep this off at, he said as he helped sit her down on a bench outside the bar before his phone rang. Hello? He asked as his boss chuckled at him. Good job on the mission, the bug is active and working great. Your ride will meet you at the motel, he said as Naruto frowned. Actually, can you push pickup back an hour or two? I promised someone I'd look after them for a bit and make sure they were safe, he said as his boss laughed softly. Consider it done, and since I know you have an important event with one of your girls I'll even make it high-speed pickup so you make it back in time, his boss said as Naruto raised his eyebrow on that. How do you? You know what, never mind. Thank you sir, he said before his boss hung up. Nature turned around and chuckled as he saw Suliouha drowsing off on the bench he sat her on just as the taxi drove up to the bar. Come on Suliouha, get up, he gently said as he tried to help her stand before she let out a giggle and wrapped her arms around him. Carry me my prince, she giggled in a drunken haze. He shook his head with a chuckle as he picked her up in a princess carry, making her squeal with glee as he unintentionally grabbed her peach, which made her smile even more. Stop squirming, he said as she giggled. Sorry, something just feels really good on my peach and I wanted more, she said as he laughed a bit before he set her down in the taxi before he went over to the other side. During the drive to the hotel, Suliouha was starting to get very touchy-feely of placing her hands all over his body, which he didn't mind, but her hands started to travel towards his privates. Whoa there, you're married dear, he said as she purred playfully before she grabbed his hand and pressed his hand into one of her melons. But I want to be touched and touched by someone who is actually sweet and nice to me, she said as she made him squeeze her BRST. Plus you are so handsome that I can't help it, she purred as he frowned as he knew she was drunk yet he couldn't feel anything wrong with her tone. Must be a truthful drunk, he thought before her pouty lips crashed against his and he felt just how great her lips felt against his. Please, even if we never meet again, make me feel like a woman, she moaned out and pleaded as he could see how much she wanted it in her eyes. Driver, pick up the pace and I will double your fare and add $50 to it, he said as the driver immediately slammed on the gas. Naruto knew it would be terribly wrong if he took advantage of a drunk married woman, but she still wanted something to ease the pain she was feeling due to her peach of a husband, but he couldn't go further than just making her have a few orgasms. As they pulled up to the motel in an incredibly impressive speed, he handed the driver the money before he carefully picked Suliouha up after he got her to let go of his hand after promising to squeeze her peach as he carried her. It was a bit difficult to book a room while carrying a giggling woman as she rubbed her peach against his hand, though after a $50 tip to be quiet the person behind the front desk quickly gave him a room. Are we going to have some fun? She asked with a squeal as she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed his neck. Well, sort of, but I think you will enjoy it just as much, he said as he gave her peach a nice strong squeeze to keep her from possibly eating on his neck, causing her to huskily. Oh, a nice big bed, she said as she let out a giggle as he laid her down on it. He chuckled at her as she started to shimmy out of her long skirt before he stopped her. Sulio'uha, dear, as much as I know you want this, and trust me I can see, I am not going to take advantage of a drunk housewife, he said as he gently slid down her skirt as he kissed up her legs. But don't think I won't ease your pain a bit, he said as she smiled and blushed at the gentle look in his eyes and the soft touch of his hands on her thighs. He kissed her softly, stroking her cheek as he slipped up her shirt to reveal a matching pair of sky blue bra and panties. Please Naruto, make me feel like a woman and not just a forced wife, she begged as he nodded with a smile. He was stunned as he slipped off her panties and to see how wet her pages. It was a appealing shade of pink with a small patch of hair above it as if the hair had just started to regrow. The hair glistened from the sweet nectar from her pee-pee that had also soaked her panties, showing that she was a true woman and was begging both body and mind to feel any form of pleasure, but he still stood at his decision of not having sex with her when she was drunk. He carefully undid her br, letting her large melons out before she covered them nervously as to hide them. What's wrong, dear? He asked as he kissed her arms and held her hands gently. I don't want you to see them. They look ugly, she said as he looked her in the eyes and kissed her forehead. Sulio'uha, dear, you are a appealing lovely woman and whatever your body is like I will treasure it, he said as he gently took her arms away to expose her large DD melons and instantly knew what had her nervous. Her melons had light lines on certain areas that were a few shades lighter than her normal skin color. Stretch marks, dear, this doesn't make them ugly at all, he said as he lightly kissed over them, making her shiver and bite her lip. This means you are a grown woman since no woman is perfect, he said as she smiled at him and started to let out small tears of joy. Don't cry, dear, I am here to make you enjoy yourself, he said as he rubbed her pee-pee and continued to embrace her melons as she let out small moans. Please, do it Naruto, she whined out as he grew a smirk and moved down to her pee-pee before shocking her as she felt his tongue enter her. She was nearly brought to an orgasm just by his tongue entering her since it had been so long since anything had but the swirling motion that he used was hitting all the right spots. She could feel the shape and girth of this tongue as it explored her pee-pee. The way it stroked against every inch it could as it traveled deeper and deeper inside of her. The feeling of his tongue seeming wanting to sample her very nectar as her body spasmed from the foreign invader inside of her. She gripped the sheets tighter to find some kind of support as she felt him arch his tongue upward and run it along the roof of her womanhood from her inside. Sulio'uha let out a throatful gasp as she felt his tongue run along her G-spot repeatedly. She has had very slight and rare STMLTN of that over the years and those were from her self-pleasuring seasons. She has never had another pleasure that sensitive part of her body for her. She could tell Naruto knew what he was doing because he would run his tongue all around the area and as he did that he buried his face further into her folds. His nose was stroking against her CLT as he pushed his tongue even deeper inside of her. Between the STMLTN of his nose and his warm breath it was making her CLT swell with a level of longing she had never felt before. Oh God, yes. Please Naruto, don't stop. More, eat me more. My husband has never done anything like this before. This feels so good. Taste me, lick me, devour me. Sulio'uha yelled out with a loud as she let go of the sheets and ran her hands through his blonde hair and gripped his head tight and pushed him deeper into her. She didn't want this pleasure to end, she didn't want this growing orgasm that is building inside of her to stop till she burst all over the face of this handsome stranger she just met who now has his face buried into her most special of places that is supposed to be only for her husband. But just thinking about the fact he isn't that man turned her on so much more. Sulio'uha almost let out a whine as she felt Naruto let go of her hips only for it to turn into a as he grabbed a handful of her now sweat-covered peach as he knew she was almost there. She lifted her legs up and put them over his shoulders to help give this stranger better access to keep her with his tongue. She knew she couldn't go any longer. Naruto, I am so close. I am leaking. Drink it all. I want to feel you lick up all my dirty juices out of this cheating pee-pee. Sulliouha shouted with a feeling slightly hotter knowing what she is doing is so wrong. She has been forced into the right roles of women for their culture for her whole life, but here she is for the first time not following those rules that chained her. She was in this hotel room with a man that showed her that he cared for her by listening to her and making her feel good before himself. And that man isn't her husband. He is a man she just came across and now was about to cover his face in her juices. Naruto smirked as he felt Sulliouha tighten around his tongue and decided to squeeze her large peach even tighter and pick up the speed of him eating around her insides and nuzzling her now hardened CLT until she came. He wasn't shocked that she came for him but was taken back by the amount. It is a true torrent that poured out of her and he didn't want to miss any of it. He quickly used his tongue to scoop out as much of her slightly bitter and salty but still incredibly sweet-tasting juices into his mouth as he opened up and put her whole twitching pee in his mouth to make sure not a drop of the sweet nectar escaped him. Once he was sure he got every drop he could and her orgasm died down, he pulled his mouth away and watched her fall to the bed. She was panting and her lips were twitching, but he could see she still had longing in her eyes, and if he wasn't so honorable he would F the absolutely gorgeous mother till she couldn't remember her name and filled to the rim with his juices. But just because he couldn't F her didn't mean he couldn't make her feel a level of passion and pleasure that she didn't know was possible. Sulliouha thought her dance of the taboo was done after her mind-shocking orgasm into this young man's face, so she wasn't at all ready for when he grabbed her hips and lifted her lower half in the air. He made her bend her spin so she was laying on her shoulders as her lower half was over her face. Thank God she stayed in loose from her yoga instructor. She goes see, or else this might have pulled something in her back. And Naruto. What are you doing? Sulliouha asked as she couldn't help but look at her puffy slightly swollen lower lips that were now hovering over her head. You didn't think I was going to let you only leak once, did you, my appealing maiden? No, I am going to remind you and this CC body of yours that you are a woman and you are going to watch as I do it. Naruto tells her with a smirk on his face. Before she can respond back, he start to run his hand on her still dripping wet pee lips. He saw her comment die in favor of a loud Naruto kept stroking on her sensitive lips, teasing her strong CLT with his fingers as he squeezed it between his fingers. He smiled as he looked down at her and saw that she hadn't broken eye contact with his pleasuring of her lower half. He grew a smirk as he made her watch as he slid 2 fingers deep inside her tight pee as he heard her let out an almost primal before he felt her pee tighten around his fingers. Almost like they missed having something warm inside of it that wasn't hers. He enjoys seeing the pleasure clearly shown on her face as he slowly pushed his hand tips deeper and deeper inside. Naruto let the music of her moans and begs of more push him to pick up speed. He smiled as he wiggled his fingers around every inch inside, stirring her up and hitting every spot he could. He continued to watch up close as she clamped down on his fingers and her juices poured out as he moved into her like he wanted to see it erupt again like she had done in her last orgasm. One of the things that was the biggest turns for him during all of this was definitely seeing her pee juice fall down her lips and body onto her own face. He couldn't even tell if she was picking up that she was being showered in her own juices at the moment, since it seemed the only thing going through her mind was the pleasure he was giving her. He watched as the juices poured out of her tight pee and couldn't help but watch it flow down the crack of her once closed peach and start to pool around her peach. He wondered how she would react since her rear seemed quite sensitive. He leaned over and let some of his own drool pour out of his mouth, making the tight hole even wetter than it was before, as he took the hand that isn't trying to mold her pee and start to use his pointer and middle finger to massage her tight peach. A smirk grew on his face as him doing it seemed to kick-start her mind as she responded in a weak, pleasure-filled tone. What are you doing back there? Sulliouha said with her barely getting it out between the panting and moaning she was letting out. She had never felt pleasure like this before in her life and he hadn't even F her yet. She thought if he really did take what she can only assume would be his large pee from the large outline of it almost bursting out of his pants and F her, she would most likely leak with every move into her and never be able to feel her husband's pee inside of her just plainly due to it lacking so much in comparison. I am going to give you pleasure and enjoyment like I said, my appealing maiden. And I am going to do it with every part of your CC body. Naruto said as he started to run his fingers with a little more force on her tight peach. He smirked as he slowly sped up the pace and depth with his fingers to make her relate this new feeling with the pleasure of him stirring her insides. He even used his thumb on the hand that is assaulting her PP to STMLT her CLT at the same time. But I never, oh my god. Sulio'uha comment was stopped dead in its tracks as she felt Naruto's 2 fingers slide into her now gaping peach. She didn't know whether or not to grunt from the slight pain or from the feeling of her PP still being simulated. Never would she thought she would be watching as another man F both of her holes over top of her, and even with the slight discomfort in her back it meant little to the pleasure she was experiencing. Naruto enjoyed seeing how tight her peach was, seeing it clench down on his fingers as he pumped them in and out of her as her juices were still flowing down from her now swollen and dripping wet PP was an insane run-on. He wanted nothing more than to hear her and leak from having both of her holes toyed with by him. He could tell by how tight it was that she never played with her peach before, so he was making sure to show her how pleasurable it could be. Sulio'uha's mind had started to blank out on her. The mild discomfort from her peach being penetrated for the first time has died, and now only the ungodly pleasure remained. She can feel him reaching around inside of her and stroking all round in her. His fingers are even touching each other inside of her, massaging the sensitive flesh between them, giving her a level of pleasure she can't even begin to explain. She never thought she would be able to leak this much, even more so from her peach being toyed with. Seeing how in her culture it was a big taboo to mess with that part of the body, she can't help but be more turned on by the fact she can feel the biggest orgasm of her life coming from that very action. Sulio'uha was always seen as the perfect wife in her family's social circles. She always did as she was told what to do and did as she was supposed to do. But now she was watching her once unsatisfied PP being pumped into and stirred more than it has ever been in her life, and feeling her peach being forced to gape open wider than ever from this man that wasn't her husband, even though he was making her feel so good. He was giving her pleasure, he was making her enjoy being a bad and naughty woman, and she loved it. She loved not being seen as the perfect wife by their standards, or even as a mother to a boy who was so spoiled he wouldn't talk to her unless he wanted something. She wanted to be ravished, pleased, to the point she came all over herself and the one giving her this forbidden pleasure. Oh God, yes, Naruto. Yes. Keep going. I am so close. Make me leak, make this bad wife leak from another man who is better than my husband. I want to watch as you ravish my tight holes with your fingers. Please keep going, keep digging into my once pure peach till it is nothing but another hole to be F with. I love it. Oh God, I am leaking. Make this naughty wife leak for you, Naruto. This was as much as she could take, as she could feel him pick up speed in all her holes, and she erupted. But it wasn't just a SQR as much as it was a torrent, stronger than the first. She couldn't continue to watch as her vision started to fade as her juices poured out of her body like a waterfall, which due to her angle it all came falling down onto her face. She was showered in her breaking of taboos of her people, and she loved it. She loved the feeling of her juices running down her face, because she knew that this was due to her finally feeling the pleasure and joy she has so long been denied and ignored. Sulio'uha also knew there was no way she could live now without this kind of pleasure being in her life. This was her final moments of thought before the liquor and the exhaustion from her repeated climaxes claimed her, and she fell into a deep sleep with a dreamy smile, thinking of her Naruto. Naruto kissed her forehead as he gently laid her down and cleaned her up with a towel before covering her in a blanket. I hope this helped you a bit, he thought as he had to clean his face off a bit before he left his number on the motel notepad and stacked it on top of her folded clothes that he put on the nightstand next to her. He quietly got out of the room before he pulled out his phone onto to see his ride already waiting for him as the driver gave him a quick salute. Get me home in half the time it took to get here and I can put you in for a promotion, he said as the man nodded before getting in the driver's seat. Sulio'uha, I hope you get your happiness, he thought with a frown before he got into the back seat before the driver took off. But he had a gut feeling that she wouldn't get what he hoped so, and his gut was never wrong. Ever. He had the strongest feeling she was supposed to be at his side but knew she had to find a way to leave her husband. He just hoped she found it soon before she could become even more miserable. An hour later. He was beyond thankful that the driver had gotten him back so fast as he was able to get home 30 minutes before Tiffany was expected to get off work. Foxy. I've missed you all day, Lisa called out as he saw her sitting on the couch with a pout as he chuckled and kissed her deeply before Janet walked into the living room before she jumped on his back, pressing her chest against his back. I've missed you too, Mstr, she teased as he chuckled and held both of them in his arms. I am sorry about all that, but I had to get Tiffany's things as she moved it, then I got called out for my job and traffic was insane, he said as he kissed their cheeks and smiled. Oh, is Tiffany a part of all this like that Hailey girl might? Lisa asked as he nodded and chuckled. Have you two had your fun yet? Janet asked as she tossed some popcorn into her mouth as she and Lisa were in the middle of watching a movie. Well, not yet, but we did have a bit of fun. But once she gets here I feel she is going to drag me off into her room, he said as they smirked. As long as we get to have some fun as well, then have fun and screw her brains out, Janet said as Lisa nodded. I need my nightly loving Foxy, Lisa purred out with a smile as they both heard the roar of a familiar car pull up to the driveway. She's back early, that's a surprise but a welcomed one. Naruto said with a chuckle. Guys, I'm home. Tiffany said, her voice resounding throughout the whole house with her melodic voice. Ah, there you are, my queen, even though I'm very happy about it, I'm curious why you are back so early. Naruto said, appearing behind her, hugging her from behind and grinded a bit against her massive peach, making her blush a beet red. Oh well, Naruto, I'm off early because my nice manager decided to give all the strippers an early release of sorts. Tiffany stuttered shyly as Lisa and Janet winked at her before turning back to their movie while she grinding her peach on Naruto's semi-stiff member. Ah, okay, so Tiffany, shall we continue our early events when I was so rudely interrupted by my oh so nice boss? Naruto said, smirking, while he started to embrace her neck and rub her cloth-covered PP, making her out in want and lust. Please, it's all I could think about all day at work, to a point I had to wipe myself down several times, she whispered out as he smiled and picked her up suddenly as she let out a squeak before he started up the stairs, making sure to squeeze her peach as he walked upstairs. And Naruto, she moaned out as she blushed and bit her lip before they went into his room. We can slow down if you want to, my queen, he said as he gently laid her down on the bed. And no. Please don't, I want this so much, I want you, all of you, Naruto. Tiffany said huskily with half-lidded eyes before she reached behind her back and unclipped her BR with a smile. He smiled as Tiffany's melons came into view as he squeezed them softly and ate on her strong tips. He felt the warmth from her soft BRST leak off onto his face as he wrapped his lips around her perky, irked tips. Naruto could hear Tiffany give off a from deep inside her if the tremor that shot through her body was anything to go by. This only encouraged him to STMLT her BRST even more. Naruto smiled down at Tiffany as she laid on his large bed and took in the sight of the goddess in front of him. Her half-open eyes so full of lust and passion, he could only think of what great thing did he do in a past life to be able to ravish such a appealing woman like this. Well, what are you waiting for, Naruto? Tiffany asked barely over a whisper, her voice sounding like angels at this point in time to Naruto. I just want to make sure this is what you want. I know we just met and I have done a lot for you, but I don't want you to feel you have to do this for me. Naruto told her as he gently ran his hand on the side of her face, stroking her soft cheek. Naruto, I want this. I know it might seem fast, but trust me when I tell you I haven't had an easy life. And one day I promise I will tell you about it all, but for now. Trust me that I have lost many good things in my life and I refuse to lose something else that could make me truly happy when it is right in front of me. So yes, I do want you, Naruto. I want this, I want us. Tiffany pours her heart out as she took and placed her hand on Naruto's and leaned into it as his hand kept stroking her delicate cheek. Okay Tiffany, I understand and you can tell me about your past whenever you feel ready to, there is no rush. Just know that I will do whatever I can to support that faith you have put into me and I will do all I can to keep you happy and give you all the love someone as appealing as you should have and then some. Naruto told her with eyes full of conviction and honestly. This brought a slight tear to Tiffany's eyes before Naruto leaned down and kissed those salty tears away. Naruto then went down and started to embrace her soft lips over and over. He could taste her cherry chapstick she used at work with every touch and he enjoyed the fruity taste that matches her perfectly. The kissing became more intense as they started to run their hands over each other's body. Naruto started to slide his hands around Tiffany's hips and around the rim of her pants while she stroked her hand on his back while the other undid his shirt. As she has finished she quickly pulled off his shirt and marveled at the godly body that she was over and on top of her. She had been with a few men in her years but none that looked as good as Naruto. She couldn't help but run her hands on his strong abs, slowly making her way up to his pecs. She kept moving till she wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him down for another embrace. As they sampled each other's mouths Naruto decided to enjoy her rubbing her pages. He slowly took his hand and slid it down her pants to not seem too eager and he was rewarded when she undid her pants to make him have easier access to her. He then ran his fingers along the thin fabric that covered her womanhood and he traced his fingers along where her lips were. Naruto can feel how the heat was building right against his fingers and becoming more and moister with each run of his fingers. Naruto felt her into his mouth as they continued kissing and loved feeling her moaning in his mouth as he continued to pleasure her, he slowly bringing her tongue into his mouth so he could suck on it and taste it while he applied more force with his fingers which caused her to spasm under him while he continued to taste her. He stopped kissing her, much to her distress and started to embrace on her neck. Slowly working his way up to her ear while he listens to her begin to breathe from having her womanhood under constant simulation. Well, it looks like someone is in the mood. Tell me Tiffany, when you were up there dancing in front of those guys, were you thinking of me or them as you were doing it? Naruto asked as he started to nibble on her ear and smiled as he heard her again as he realized that hearing her sweet voice rise in pleasure was something he would never be tired of. Why yes. Tiffany moaned out with a dark blush as she seemed almost shy to admit it, which made it so much cuter to him. Oh, were you thinking what it would be like if I was watching that CC body of yours dance on stage? Naruto asked as he took his hand slid it down her now damp panties. He ran his hands on her smooth lower body down till he felt himself hit her now dripping wet lips before he ran his fingers all across them, hearing her suck in a lungful of air before Naruto continued. Or were you thinking about me stripping you down and F you right there on stage as they all watch as their favorite girl is claimed by the only man that can touch her? Naruto whispered in her ear as he ran his fingers along her hardening CLT. Oh God. The second one. I couldn't help but imagine you taking me. All their eyes, I could only think about you watching me as I dance. You wanting to lay me down and take me right there in front of all those perverted men and my friends. Tiffany confessed as she started to breathe harder and harder as she felt her sensitive flesh of her lower lips being touched all over by the warm fingers of Naruto. Oh, tell me, did you get turned on? Did it turn you on thinking about me, your CC body with all those eyes watching us? With your friends seeing you on your hands and knees yelling as you feel this, as you beg for this? That was when Naruto took and slid 2 fingers into her wet pages. He smiled as he heard her gasp at the sudden invasion of her body and her lower half lifted off the bed from the shocking STMLTN. She was more loose compared to the other PP he had the pleasure of STMLTNG not too long ago, but he gets the feeling it hadn't been as long since Tiffany had some action. Did you picture the other girls seeing you take my strong, long, hot PP deep inside your hot tight PP over and over till you leak? Naruto whispered to her as his lips touched her ear as he listened her moaning and panting as his fingers were going deeper and deeper into her by the second. Why yes. All those eyes, all I see was you, and all I could think about was you claiming me as yours and make me your beach. showing everyone that they may look at my body but it belongs to you. I wanted to show the other girls how this kind sweet man I found marked me as the inside and out. Tiffany barely got out as she is too busy focusing on gyrating her hips against Naruto's fingers, trying to get them as deep inside her as she can. Well, show me then. Show me and show them how much you want me to claim them. Pull off these wet panties and show them that you are mine. Naruto said as he picked her up and started to pump his fingers deep inside of her. He felt that when he mentioned them, seeing her, she tightened around his fingers. It seems that even if Tiffany doesn't have SEC with her clients, she has a slight FTSH for being watched or risk being caught. I will have to file this for later, like having Lisa and Janet seeing me do her. Naruto thought as he nibbled on her earlobe while he stroked around inside her womanhood. With shaky hands, Tiffany reached for her wet panties and slowly pulled them out and wiggled out of them as she felt Naruto's hand had not stopped from feeling around inside her. She felt like she was going to leak very soon. That a girl, now get on my lap and show them that tight PP so I can show them it is mine and only mine forever and ever. Naruto said with a commanding tone, as he stopped pumping into her snatch and sat up on the end of his bed. Tiffany whined as she wanted to hurry up and get any part of him back inside of her as she hurried up and crawled back over to him and got on his lap. He smirked as he forced her to turn around to face his full body mirror while Tiffany couldn't help but look at herself naked, sweating lightly, sitting on Naruto's lap before she felt herself get wetter. She did as he said and opened her legs wide while facing the mirror. She couldn't help but look at the reflection and picture as if she was on backstage and all those guys and her friends were looking at her naked and spreading her legs out wide. She then felt Naruto's hands run down her body to her PP and she felt him use his hands to open it up, showing inside her, and all her now building juices slowly dripped out of her. Any thought she was about to have was ended when she felt Naruto slide 2-finger right back inside her and he started to pump them with much vigor and gusto. Tiffany couldn't help but and breathe as she felt her insides being stirred up by the man she was sitting on. She didn't stop looking at the mirror and picture all those eyes and shocked faces looking at her as she was being fingered in front of them all. All those people that are looking at her as she was claimed by the man that was slowly claiming more and more of her heart the longer she knew him. He was going to claim her and her body right here in front of everyone. He was going to let all these men and the creeps know that she was his, and it turned her on. She was getting off so much by his fingers that she couldn't hold it in much longer. Look at them, Tiffany, look at them staring at your sweet CCPP as I play with it. Look at them staring with want and longing and jealousy as I claim you as mine. Tell them anything you want as they watch you leak all over your stage, and tell them they'll never have you. Naruto told her as he started to massage her G-spot deep inside her as he used his other hand to STMLT her CLT, and knew she couldn't last long if the way she was spasming on the insides was anything to go by. Watch me. Watch me everyone as I leak. See how I leak for my man and him only. Watch as he touches the PP that is only for him now. See how I leak all over just from his touch. I am his now and I want to show you all what that means. Tiffany shouted as she couldn't hold it any longer as she came all over herself, and Naruto's hands and her legs twitched and shook as she let out a slow flow of juices from her PP. Naruto then took her and pulled her on top of him as he slipped out of his pants and boxers, leaving her laying against his strong CHST and his long throbbing erection pressing against her stomach as it caused her to come back to what she was doing at the moment. Whenever you are ready, Tiffany, I am ready to truly claim you as mine and give you that happiness and pleasure I promised you. Naruto told her in a sweet voice as he ran his hand down her sweat-drenched hair while he kissed her on the side of her face and forehead. I am ready, Naruto, I want to be yours and no one else. Tiffany said as she lifted herself up from Naruto and positioned her dripping womanhood over his pillar of a PP. She slowly lowered herself, grinding her PP directly against his hot head, causing her to let out a whimper from the heat she was now feeling against her tender lower body. She slowly lowered herself more and more down on his unyielding PP. She had never felt so full as it just never seemed to run out as she kept going lower. She knew soon she would be too full to take any more, but she wanted to take all of him her first time with him. She finally was able to get all of him inside her when he bottomed out in her. She never felt so full as she did right now and could even feel him touching against her curvx. She moaned as she stroked her stomach right where she can feel him slightly penetrating through her stomach. They didn't move for a bit as she adjusted to the girth that was now stretching out her womanhood more than any toy or man she has ever had. Once she started to feel like she was used to it, Tiffany slowly rose until only his thick, hot head is still in her before she then dropped down and pierced herself on him. She couldn't help but gasp and try to catch her breath since she just feel like it was knocked out of her with the intense wave of pleasure and fullness that just flooded her senses. She took another second or two before doing it again. Each time she did it the time between pumps became less and less until she became vigorously bouncing on his hot rod. OH Naruto. F. You are so big. Don't stop baby, keep F me. I can feel and see you through my stomach. You are reshaping my PP for you and you alone. You are claiming my insides right now. Do it, claim this tight PP as yours. Tiffany moaned out to Naruto as she leaned over and rocked her lower half on his strong PP, making it flood her insides with pleasure and the feeling of something hot and long stroking against her core. Naruto took this as a sign to get a bit wild as he gripped her plump, glistening peach as best as he could as he then leaned up and started to pump into her himself while eating on her tips with extra vigor. He made her go much faster with more force as he felt his girth start to slide against her curvx with each powerful move. He smirked as he saw her have a mix of pleasure and pain from being filled truly to her breaking point, but the constant moaning and the way her PP was drenching his strong PP, he decided to keep going. God! Don't stop, F, I am so full, faster. I want you to F me till I pass out, baby. I want to not be able to feel my legs, I want your F, baby, she said as she let out a loud mm. I think I just came again. I lost count anymore. This feels so F good. Tiffany said as she gripped Naruto's shoulders to try to get some kind of handle to stabilize herself. Naruto heard what she said and decided to take it as a challenge. She wanted him to claim her, then he would make her watch her face as he made her his. Tiffany was in pure bliss as she rode her man's strong PP, but she grew shocked when she shifted faster than she could realize what is going on, as the next thing she knew she was on her hands and knees facing the same mirror as before. Before she could respond, she let out a primal animalistic as she felt Naruto bottom out in her in one move. He then started to PND into her like he is trying to break her. This time she wasn't controlling the pace, he was. She then felt him lean over while gripping her tight peach as she loved the feeling of his hands around her rear. You want me to claim you so everyone knows you are mine? Well, I will do just that. I will F you and every part of you over and over while painting your insides with my baby batter till everyone knows you are mine and mine alone. Naruto said as he smiled, feeling her PP tighten around his strong PP, almost like her body is agreeing with him and wanting him to claim her. Naruto then gripped her peach even harder and used it to pull her whole weight back on his strong PP, only to be met with the force of his move as he could feel her try to tighten on his PP to keep him inside of her, but he kept thrusting more and more. The only sound she made was an incoherent sounds rain from her mouth as her juices just seemed to pour out of her. He loved the sight as he watched her peach jiggled each time his pelvis crashed into her. She seemed to not be able to stop herself from leaking anymore as it is just kept pouring out of her without any thought. He smiled more as he then used his hand to reach down and start to rub her peach as he kept at her, making it even more wet as he used her leaking juices. Once it was nice and wet, he took his thumb and started to tease her tight peach while she tried to say something, but she couldn't get the words out under his relentless pounding. After properly teasing it, he took and slid 2 fingers into it, and he took it by the spasm Tiffany had when he slid his fingers inside her. He would think she has played with her peach before and enjoyed it by the throaty that accompanied the twitches her body gave off to the new STMLTN. Naruto then picked up the pace. He thrusted deep inside her with every pump, changing his angle so he hit different spot inside her with each move. The whole time he was making her tight peach gap and its spasm as he played with her tight peach, massaging her insides from a different possession than she was used to. Tiffany was truly lost in bliss at this point. Tiffany had never been so passionately and vigorously. He was reaching places she has never touched herself, let alone anyone else. She had played with her peach a few times herself under the recommendation of some of her work friends, but only with one fingers before. This was so much more and so much more STMLTNG than that, and she got the feeling that this was just the start, and by the end of the night she will have this strong PP reshaping her once tight peach as well till it is overflowing with his hot juices, and she couldn't wait to have another part of her claimed as his. Tiffany was reaching her breaking point as the STMLTN of every part of her lower regions and the build-up she had from all day at work have finally caught up with her before she moaned at the top of her lungs as she came harder than she ever has before all over Naruto's throbbing raw PP that hasn't stopped pumping inside her through her whole orgasm, extending it much longer, and with him toying with her peach didn't help. By this point Tiffany thought they wouldn't go on much longer, but she was shocked that Naruto took her and laid her on her back while lifting up her leg over his shoulder as he looked down on her. "Well, it is nice you came again, baby, but we are far from done. I have been teased up myself and I am very built up and I am going to take it out on you. So get ready, because I am going to do just what you wanted and claim every single part of your CC body over and over till you are bathed in my hot juices and you watch it pour out of every opening you have, baby," he said as before he held her hip and leg over his shoulder as he went back to vigorously positioning out of her. Tiffany had a long night as Naruto did just that for hours on end. He claimed her tight peach, tips and mouth leaking in and on her more times than he can count, and Tiffany came so many times it just felt like a constant orgasm after a while, where she just had her eyes halfway roll in the back of her head with her juices covered tongue hanging out of her mouth as Naruto F her until she knew she could only be with him from this point onward, and she absolutely loved it. Naruto smiled down as he pet Tiffany's head as he had cleaned her up after she passed out before lying next to her as she clung to him in her sleep as if he was a stuffed bear, as he had tired her out greatly from their intense love-making. "Foxy, can we come in?" Lisa asked as she opened the door before she and Janet peeked from behind it. "Sure, just be quiet," he said as they nodded and covered their mouth to muffle their giggles. "We couldn't hear anything due to your soundproofing, but she looks content," Janet said as they carefully got onto the bed with Lisa resting on his chest as Janet claimed his untaken arm. "You owe us some fun in the morning, Foxy," Lisa said as he kissed her and Janet softly. "I'll make it up to you, I promise," he said with a smile as he basked in the warmth of his three gorgeous girls. "I am so glad I found them," he thought as he drifted off to sleep with a truly happy smile etched on his face. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 3. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Dragon from Heaven on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.